The ballroom fell silent as Ethan Calloway stood before Wyoming's most powerful families, every eye locked on him, waiting. His father's ultimatum had been clear. Choose a bride from one of these 5 elite bloodlines tonight, or watch the ranch crumble into dust. But when Ethan's gaze drifted past the silk gowns and calculated smiles to find Lila Hart standing in the doorway, dirt still on her boots, defiance burning in her eyes, he knew the empire his father built was about to shatter. Because some choices don't just break rules, they break dynasties. If you want to see how far love can reach when everything's on the line, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Wyoming wind carried the smell of dust and cattle shit across 10,000 acres of Callaway land, and Ethan stood on the ridge overlooking it all, wondering how something so vast could feel like a noose around his neck. 26 years old, and he'd never made a single decision that mattered. Not about the ranch, not about the herds, not about his own life. His father, Marcus Calloway, had built this empire from nothing, a fact he mentioned approximately 3 times per conversation, and every choice, every move, every breath on this land happened because Marcus willed it. You see that? Marcus's voice cut through the morning air behind him. Heavy boots crunched through the scrub grass. That's 3 generations of work. That's what it means to be a Calloway. Ethan didn't turn around. He'd heard this speech before. Hell, he could recite it. Railroads coming through, Marcus continued, stopping beside him. The old man was 62, but moved like someone 20 years younger, all coiled muscle and sharp edges. They're taking land from anyone who can't defend it. Families that have been here since before the war, gone, bought out or pushed out. I know. Do you? Marcus turned, and Ethan felt the weight of that stare. Because we're next on their list. They want our eastern pasture, the water rights, the whole damn corridor from here to Laramie. Ethan finally looked at his father. So we fight them. You fought off worse. Not without allies. Marcus pulled a cigar from his pocket, bit off the end, and spit it into the dirt. This isn't about cattle thieves or squatters. This is money, real money, railroad money. And the only thing that stops money like that is other money, or the kind of power you can't buy. What are you saying? Marcus lit the cigar, took a long pull, exhaled smoke into the wind. I'm saying you're getting married. The words hung there like a gunshot's echo. The hell I am. 5 families, Marcus continued as if Ethan hadn't spoken. The Beaumonts, the Thorntons, the Ashfords, the Merricks, and the Delaney's. Between them, they control half the territory, mines, lumber, shipping contracts, political connections in Washington. An alliance with any one of them makes us untouchable. You want me to marry someone I don't even know. I want you to grow the fuck up. Marcus's voice went cold. You think this ranch runs on good intentions? You think I built this by following my heart? Every decision I've made has been for this land, for this family, for the future you're supposed to inherit. And now it's your turn to make one goddamn sacrifice. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. And if I refuse? Then you're not the man I raised. Marcus turned away, started walking back toward the main house. They're arriving next week, all 5 families. You'll meet the daughters, you'll be respectful, and you'll choose one before the month is out. That's not a request. The old man disappeared over the ridge, leaving Ethan alone with the wind and the sick feeling in his gut that his life had just been sold out from under him. The stables smelled like hay and leather and honest work, and Ethan found himself heading there without thinking, his boots carrying him away from the main house and everything it represented. He found Lila Hart in the 3rd stall, working with a chestnut mare that had thrown 3 riders in the last week. She moved slow and steady, one hand on the horse's neck, murmuring something too quiet for Ethan to hear. The mare's ears flicked back and forth, torn between fear and trust. She's not ready, Ethan said from the doorway. Lila didn't startle. She never did. She's ready. She's just tired of men who think they can break her. She ran her hand down the mare's shoulder, and something in the movement made Ethan's chest ache. There was a rightness to the way Lila existed in this space. No performance, no calculation, just competence and quiet strength. You heard, he said. It wasn't a question. Whole ranch heard. Lila finally turned to look at him. 24 years old, with dark hair always escaping its braid and dirt perpetually under her fingernails. She'd been working on the Callaway Ranch since she was 16, after her father died and left her with nothing but debts and a talent for understanding horses better than people. Your father doesn't exactly whisper. It's bullshit. It's survival. Lila moved to the next stall, started measuring out feed. Railroad's been buying up land from here to the Utah border. Small ranchers can't compete. Your father's doing what he has to do. By selling me off like livestock? She stopped, looked at him with those sharp green eyes that never let him get away with self-pity. You're not livestock, Ethan. You're the heir to the biggest ranch in 3 counties. You've got options most people never dream of. Not the option I want. The words came out harder than he meant them to, and Lila's expression shifted, something careful sliding into place, a wall going up that hadn't been there a second ago. Don't, she said quietly. Don't what? Don't make this harder than it already is. She went back to the feed, her movements a little too precise, a little too controlled. Your father's right. You need to marry someone who can help protect this place. That's not me. That was never going to be me. Ethan crossed the space between them in 3 strides, caught her hand. The hell it wasn't. She pulled away, but not before he saw the flash of pain in her eyes. I work in your stables, Ethan. I sleep in a room above the tack house. I've got nothing to offer except everything that matters. That's not how the world works, and you know it. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the calm she was trying to maintain. These families your father's bringing in, they've got wealth, connections, power. They can actually help you. I can't. I don't want their help. Then you're a fool. She grabbed a bridle off the wall, started toward the door. And I don't have time for fools, even rich ones. She brushed past him, and Ethan stood there in the stable, surrounded by the smell of horses and hay and the wreckage of the only future he'd ever wanted. The first family arrived on a Tuesday, rolling up the main drive in a carriage that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. The Beaumonts. Ethan watched from the second-floor window as his father greeted them with the kind of charm Marcus usually reserved for cattle buyers he was planning to fleece. Thomas Beaumont owned half the silver mines in Colorado and had enough political connections to make problems disappear. His daughter, Catherine, stepped out of the carriage in a blue dress that probably took 3 people to put on. She's beautiful, his mother said from behind him. Eleanor Calloway had been quiet since Marcus made his announcement, moving through the house like a ghost. She'd married Marcus 30 years ago in her own arranged alliance. Her family's shipping business merged with his growing cattle operation, and she'd never once complained about it where Ethan could hear. But he'd seen the way she looked at Marcus sometimes, like she was staring at a stranger who happened to share her bed. That doesn't mean anything, Ethan said. No. His mother moved beside him, looked down at the Beaumonts. But it doesn't hurt either. Did you love him? When you married him? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. I respected him. That seemed like enough. Was it? She touched his shoulder, a rare gesture of affection. That's not a question I can answer for you. Dinner that night was a performance. Marcus at the head of the table, expansive and powerful. Thomas Beaumont matching him story for story about building empires in hostile territory. Catherine sitting across from Ethan, smiling at appropriate moments, asking polite questions about ranch management that sounded rehearsed. She was smart. He could see that immediately. Educated back east, spoke 3 languages, understood the intricacies of territorial politics better than most men in the room. She'd been groomed for exactly this, to be an asset, a connection, a bridge between powerful families. What do you think of Wyoming? Ethan asked, mostly because someone had to say something. It's vast, Catherine said carefully. Different from Boston. That's diplomatic. A flash of something genuine crossed her face. Amusement, maybe. It's honest. I'm still learning to read the landscape here. Everything feels bigger, more dangerous. It is dangerous. That's part of the appeal. Is it? She tilted her head slightly. Or is it just all you've ever known? The question landed harder than he expected, and for a second Ethan actually saw her as a person rather than a chess piece his father was trying to maneuver into position. Both probably, he admitted. Catherine nodded slowly. My father talks about opportunity, about expansion and progress and taming the wilderness, but I think that's men's language for justifying what they already want to do. She glanced toward Marcus and Thomas, deep in conversation about railroad routes and land values. They build their empires and call it destiny. And what do you call it? Expensive. She smiled, but there was something sad in it, in every possible way. The conversation moved on, pulled back into the current of business and strategy, but Ethan kept thinking about that smile. About the price Catherine clearly understood she was expected to pay. After dinner, he escaped to the porch, needing air and space and distance from the weight of expectations pressing down on every interaction. Lila was there, sitting on the railing, looking out at the dark expanse of ranch land. "You're supposed to be inside," Ethan said, "charming your future in-laws." "Pretty sure charm's not my strong suit." He leaned against the post beside her. "Catherine seems decent." "That's high praise." "I mean it. She's smart, self-aware, knows exactly what game she's playing." Lila didn't respond immediately. She just sat there, outlined against the stars. And Ethan felt the familiar ache of wanting something that existed 3 feet away and might as well be on the moon. "This is going to happen," Lila said finally. "You know that, right? Your father's not bluffing. The railroad's not going away. And I—" She stopped, shook her head. "I'm not going to be the reason you lose everything." "You wouldn't be." "Yes, I would." She turned to face him, and in the lamplight from the windows he could see the resolution in her expression. "Because you're stubborn enough to choose me anyway, and that would destroy you. Destroy this place, and I'm not worth that. Don't tell me what you're worth." "Someone has to." She slid off the railing, started walking away. "Because you sure as hell can't see it clearly." The Thorntons arrived Thursday, the Ashfords on Saturday, the Merricks the following Monday. Each family brought wealth, power, connections. Each daughter brought intelligence, grace, and the clear understanding that this was a transaction dressed up in courtship's clothing. Margaret Thornton had a sharp wit and sharper political instincts. Her uncle sat in Congress. Her father controlled lumber interests from Wyoming to Washington state. She asked Ethan pointed questions about the ranch's vulnerabilities and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Victoria Ashford was quieter, more careful, but Ethan caught her watching everything with the attention of someone trained to spot opportunities. Her family owned shipping contracts and warehouse operations throughout the territory. Sarah Merrick was youngest, barely 20, and seemed overwhelmed by the whole production. Her father had made his fortune in mining equipment and supply contracts, and she clearly would have preferred to be anywhere else. They were all, in their own ways, exactly what Marcus wanted: smart enough to be useful, connected enough to be valuable, polished enough to make the Callaway name something more than just cattle and dirt. And every interaction, every polite conversation, every carefully orchestrated dinner felt like another bar being welded into the cage closing around Ethan's life. He started avoiding the main house, spending more time on the range, checking fence lines that didn't need checking, inventorying herds that had been inventoried twice already. Anything to escape the parade of potential futures, all of them perfectly reasonable and completely wrong. He'd see Lila sometimes, working with the horses, and she'd pretend not to notice him, building distance deliberately, carving out space between them like it could somehow make this easier. It didn't. The Delaney's were the last to arrive, rolling in 2 weeks after the Beaumonts, with an entourage that included 3 carriages and enough luggage to outfit a small army. James Delaney owned freight operations and had contracts with the railroad itself, the very entity threatening to devour smaller ranchers. His daughter Elizabeth stepped out of the lead carriage wearing a dress that probably cost more than some people's houses. "Well," Marcus said, watching from the porch with something like satisfaction in his voice, "now we're getting somewhere." Ethan felt sick. That night, all 5 families gathered for dinner, a massive affair that required bringing in extra staff and setting up tables in the formal dining room that rarely got used. It should have felt like a celebration. Instead, it felt like an auction. Ethan sat at the center of it all, watching Marcus work the room like a maestro conducting a symphony of power and influence. The fathers talked business, the mothers discussed society and connections, the daughters navigated the undercurrents with varying degrees of skill and resignation. And through the window, barely visible in the lamplight spilling from the house, Ethan could see Lila in the stables. Working, alone, exactly where society said she belonged. Something in him cracked. He stood abruptly, cutting off whatever Thomas Beaumont had been saying about mineral rights. "Excuse me," Ethan said, and walked out of the dining room, out of the house, out of the carefully constructed theater of his father's ambitions. He found Lila in the same stall where he'd found her 2 weeks ago, working with the chestnut mare. The horse had calmed considerably, responding to Lila's patience in ways she'd never respond to force. "You should be inside," Lila said without looking up. "So should you." "I work here, Ethan. I don't perform there." He leaned against the stall door, suddenly exhausted. "What if I don't want to perform either?" "Then you're in the wrong family." She finally looked at him, and her expression was careful, guarded. "You made your choice when you walked out of that room. Everyone in there knows it." "Good. Is it?" Lila set down the brush she'd been using. "Because tomorrow your father's going to ask you what the hell you're doing, and the day after that, those families are going to start leaving, and eventually the railroad's going to come through, and without the alliances Marcus is building, this ranch, everything you've ever known, it won't survive." Maybe it shouldn't. The words surprised both of them. Lila crossed the space between them slowly, stopped close enough that he could smell the hay and leather on her clothes. "You don't mean that, don't I?" Ethan reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. "What's the point of saving something if it costs everything worth saving it for?" "That's poet's talk." But her fingers tightened around his. "The world doesn't run on poetry." "Then what does it run on?" "Power. Money. The same things it's always run on." She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw everything she wasn't saying, all the want and resignation and fear wrapped up together. "And people like me don't have either. You have something better." "What's that?" "The truth." He pulled her closer, and she let him, though he could feel the tension in her shoulders. "Every single person in that house is performing, playing a part, pretending this is about anything other than consolidating power. You're the only real thing in 100 miles. Real doesn't feed cattle. Real doesn't stop railroads." "Maybe it should." She pulled back slightly, studying his face like she was trying to memorize it. "They're going to ask you to choose. Soon. Your father can't wait forever." "I know." "And when they do," her voice caught, "when they do, you need to choose the smart thing, the thing that keeps this place alive." "Even if it kills me?" "Better that than killing everything your father built." She stepped away, putting distance between them again. "I mean it, Ethan. When the time comes, you choose the ranch. You choose the future. You choose what makes sense." "And what about you?" Lila smiled, and it was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. "I was never really an option. We both knew that." She walked out of the stables, disappearing into the darkness beyond the lamplight, and Ethan stood there wondering how you're supposed to choose a future when the only one you want is the one everyone says you can't have. Well, the confrontation came at dawn. Marcus found Ethan in the study, where he'd spent most of the night staring at ledgers and trying to find an answer that didn't exist. "We need to talk," Marcus said, closing the door behind him. Ethan set down his pen. "Do we?" "You walked out of dinner last night, left 5 of the territory's most powerful families sitting at our table while you went to the goddamn stables." "I needed air. You needed discipline." Marcus poured himself a whiskey despite the early hour. "I've been patient. I've let you meet these women, let you take your time. But we're out of time, Ethan. The railroad's moving fast. They've already bought out the Hendersons and the Michaels place. We're next if we don't shore up our position." "By selling me. By securing our future." Marcus downed the whiskey, poured another. "You think I like this? You think I wanted my son's marriage to be a business transaction? But that's what it takes to survive in this world. That's what I've been trying to teach you your entire life." Ethan stood, faced his father across the desk. "What if I don't want to survive that way?" "Then you're a fool." Marcus's voice went cold. "And I didn't raise a fool. You raised someone who's supposed to inherit all this." Ethan gestured at the room, the house, the land beyond. "But what am I inheriting if I have to become you to keep it?" The words landed like a punch. Marcus's expression went rigid, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "You think you're better than me," Marcus said quietly. "You think because you've got your mother's soft heart and your romantic notions about love and authenticity, that makes you superior. I think there's more than one way to be strong." "Then you're wrong." Marcus set down his glass with enough force to crack it. "There's strong and there's dead. There's winners and there's forgotten. I built this empire from nothing, and I did it by making hard choices that soft men couldn't make. And now you're going to throw it all away because of some stable girl with dirt under her fingernails. Don't talk about her like that. Why not? That's what she is. Marcus moved around the desk, got in Ethan's face. She's a good worker, decent with horses, but she's got no family, no connections, no value beyond labor. Marrying her would be the end of everything I've built, everything you're supposed to protect. Maybe I don't want to protect it anymore. The slap came fast, sharp, shocking in its suddenness. Ethan's head snapped to the side, and for a moment both men just stood there, breathing hard. You've got until the end of the week, Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. You choose one of those 5 women, or I disown you. Sign the ranch over to my nephew. You'll get nothing. Not the land, not the house, not a single head of cattle. You want to throw away your legacy for some romantic fantasy? Fine. But you'll do it with empty pockets and no name worth speaking. Marcus walked out, leaving Ethan alone with a stinging cheek and the ruins of everything he'd thought he knew about his father. 3 days left. Ethan spent them in motion, riding the boundaries of the ranch, trying to find clarity in the landscape his family had controlled for 3 generations. But every ridge, every valley, every creek bed just reminded him of what he stood to lose. The 5 families remained, though the atmosphere had shifted. Polite inquiries became pointed questions. Patient waiting became thinly veiled pressure. Everyone knew a decision was coming, and the weight of their expectations pressed down like a physical thing. Catherine Beaumont found him on the North Ridge the second day. Mind if I join you? She asked, already dismounting. They stood side by side, looking out at the rolling grassland. You know what I think? Catherine said after a while. I think you're in love with someone you can't have, and you're trying to figure out if love is worth losing everything else. Ethan glanced at her, surprised by the directness. Am I wrong? She asked. No, Catherine nodded slowly. My mother loved someone once, before my father, a musician with no prospects and a romantic soul. She chose my father instead, the smart choice, the stable choice, the choice that made sense to everyone except her heart. Did she regret it? Every single day. Catherine turned to face him. But she'd tell you she made the right choice anyway, because regret is private, poverty isn't. And love doesn't pay for food or security or the future. That's bleak. That's honest. She remounted her horse. For what it's worth, I'd make you a good wife, Ethan. I'm smart enough to help run this place, connected enough to protect it, and realistic enough to know that fondness can grow where love doesn't exist. You could do worse. I could also do better. Catherine smiled sadly. Could you? Or do you just want to believe you could? She rode off, leaving Ethan alone with the question and no good answer. 2 days left. Lila avoided him completely now, ate her meals in the tack house, worked the horses early before he was up, built walls between them that felt deliberate and final. Ethan caught her once, late at night, and she looked at him with eyes that held so much pain he almost couldn't stand it. Please don't make this harder, she whispered. Please just choose someone and let me start figuring out how to forget you. I can't. Then you're going to lose everything, and it'll be my fault. It won't be your fault. It'll be my choice. She pressed her hands to her face and her shoulders shook. I don't want to be your choice. I want you to have a future. I want this place to survive. Her voice broke. I want you to be okay, even if it's not with me. He pulled her hands away, made her look at him. What if I'm only okay if it is with you? Then we're both fucked, she said, and started crying in earnest, huge wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. Ethan held her while she cried, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, he felt something besides trapped. He felt certain. It didn't matter if it was stupid. Didn't matter if it cost him everything. Some things were worth losing the world for. 1 day left. Marcus called Ethan into his office at noon, and waiting there were all 5 families, fathers and daughters, a tribunal of wealth and power. Time's up, Marcus said. You choose now, or you walk away with nothing. Ethan looked at the 5 women arrayed before him, Catherine with her sad wisdom, Margaret with her sharp intelligence, Victoria with her careful calculations, Sarah with her overwhelmed resignation, Elizabeth with her untouchable confidence, all of them waiting, all of them knowing. And somewhere outside, Lila was working with the horses, trying to build a life around the hole he was about to leave in it. "I need 24 hours, Ethan said. "You need to make a choice," Marcus countered. "And I will, tomorrow. I need one more day to— To what? Figure out a miracle? Find a way to save everything?" "To be sure." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Tomorrow, noon. We gather here and you give me an answer. No more delays." The families filed out, and Ethan was left alone with his father. "Don't do something stupid," Marcus said quietly. "Please. I know I've been hard on you. I know you think I don't understand. But everything I've done has been to protect this family. Don't throw it away." It was the closest thing to pleading Ethan had ever heard from his father, and it nearly broke him. "I'll give you an answer tomorrow," was all he could say. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in the study, surrounded by ledgers and land deeds and 3 generations of Callaway history, and tried to find an answer that didn't feel like surrender. The ranch was worth millions. The land, the herds, the water rights, everything his father had built through iron will and calculated ruthlessness. But what was it worth if the cost of keeping it was becoming someone he couldn't recognize in the mirror? Dawn came gray and cold, and with it, the terrible clarity of knowing exactly what he had to do. Ethan found Lila in the east pasture at first light, her silhouette barely visible against the pale horizon. She was checking fence posts that didn't need checking. Busy work, the kind you do when staying still means thinking too much. "You shouldn't be out here," she said without turning around. "You've got a decision to make." "I've already made it." Her hands stilled on the wire she'd been testing. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't tell me." She finally looked at him, and her face was raw with sleeplessness. "Whatever you're about to say, whatever stupid, noble thing you've convinced yourself is right, just don't. Make your choice at noon like your father wants. But don't drag me into it beforehand. I can't—" Her voice cracked. "I can't be the reason you destroy your life." Ethan dismounted, walked to where she stood. "You're not the reason. You're the point." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not." He reached for her, and this time she didn't pull away. "The reason would be obligation. The point is choice. And I'm choosing you." Lila closed her eyes, and tears slid down her cheeks. "You're choosing poverty. Exile. Your father will disown you, Ethan. He meant every word." "I know. And the ranch, everything he built, it'll go to someone else. You'll have nothing." "I'll have you." She let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "That's not enough. That's never going to be enough when you're 40 years old and broken from work that doesn't pay, living in some shack on land you don't own, remembering what you gave up." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." She pulled away, wrapped her arms around herself. "Because I've been poor, Ethan, real poor. The kind where you go to bed hungry and wake up cold and spend every single day one disaster away from losing everything. It's not romantic. It's not noble. It's just hard and mean, and it grinds you down until you can't remember what hope felt like. Then we'll be ground down together." "You don't get it." She turned on him, anger flashing through the tears. "You've never been without. Never wondered where your next meal was coming from. Never had to choose between fixing your boots or eating. You think love is enough because you've never had to test it against real deprivation. So teach me." The words stopped her cold. "What?" "Teach me," Ethan repeated. "Show me what it's really like. And if I can't handle it, if I break, then you'll know you were right. But at least give me the chance to prove I'm serious." Lila stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. "You're really going to do this? Walk away from everything? Unless you tell me not to." She looked out at the pasture, at the land rolling away toward the mountains. "I should tell you not to. That would be the smart thing." "Are you going to?" "No." She met his eyes again. "Because I'm just as stupid and selfish as you are. And because—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "Because I love you too much to lie about what I want, even if it's wrong." Ethan pulled her close, and she pressed her face against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, holding on to each other while the sun climbed higher and the hours until noon ticked away. "What are you going to tell them?" Lila asked finally. "The truth. That'll go over well. Probably not. He kissed the top of her head. But I'm done pretending. They rode back together as the ranch woke up around them. Hands heading out to the herds, smoke rising from the cookhouse. The familiar rhythm of a working day starting. Ethan tried to memorize it, knowing that after today, he might never have the right to call any of this home. Marcus was waiting on the porch when they arrived, his expression carved from stone. "You've got 4 hours," he said to Ethan, ignoring Lila completely. "I suggest you use them wisely." Inside the house, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The 5 families had gathered in the formal dining room for breakfast, though nobody seemed to be eating much. Ethan could feel their eyes on him as he entered, measuring, calculating, wondering which of them would win the prize. Catherine Beaumont caught his eye and gave him a small, knowing smile. She'd already figured it out. "Ethan," his mother appeared at his elbow, her voice low. "Please tell me you're not about to do what I think you're about to do." "I can't tell you that." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "Your father will never forgive you. I know. And you're doing it anyway." "Yes." She touched his face gently, the way she used to when he was small. "Then I hope she's worth it." "She is." "That's not what I meant." His mother's eyes were sad. "I meant I hope she's strong enough for what comes next, because it's going to be harder than either of you imagine." The morning crawled by with excruciating slowness. Ethan tried to eat breakfast and couldn't, tried to review the ranch ledgers one last time and couldn't focus, tried to figure out what the hell he was going to say when noon came and couldn't find words that didn't sound insane. He was giving up millions of dollars, thousands of acres, generations of legacy. For what? A woman with no money, no connections, no power to give him anything except herself. Put like that, it sounded crazy. But every time doubt crept in, Ethan thought about the alternative, standing at an altar with Catherine or Margaret or Victoria or Sarah or Elizabeth, speaking vows that meant nothing except strategic alliance, spending the rest of his life playing the part his father had written for him. That sounded crazier. At 11:30, someone knocked on his door. "Come in." It was Margaret Thornton. She entered without invitation, closed the door behind her, and studied him with those sharp political eyes. "You're not going to choose any of us," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." Margaret nodded slowly. "My father's going to be furious. He's already been talking with Marcus about lumber contracts and expanded operations. This will embarrass him considerably." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She moved to the window, looked out at the ranch. "I'm relieved, actually. I was prepared to marry you. It would have been a smart move for my family, but I didn't want to. You seem like a decent man, Ethan, but decent isn't enough to build a life on when neither party actually wants the other." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because someone should." Margaret turned back to him. "My mother spent 30 years in a strategic marriage. She did her duty, gave my father heirs, managed his social obligations with grace and skill, and she was miserable every single day. I watched it hollow her out until there was nothing left but performance." She paused. "I won't do that. I'd rather stay unmarried and maintain my own independence than become an ornament in someone else's empire. Does your father know you feel that way?" "Not yet." Margaret smiled grimly. "But he's about to find out. Your rebellion's going to give me cover for my own." She left, and Ethan sat there wondering how many other lives were being bent and broken by these calculated alliances. How many people were trapped in the same machine his father was trying to feed him into. Noon came too fast and not fast enough. The families gathered in Marcus's office, a room that suddenly felt too small for the weight of expectation filling it. The 5 daughters stood in a line, each representing a different future, a different compromise, a different version of who Ethan could become. Marcus stood behind his desk like a judge preparing to hand down a sentence. "Well," he said, "we've waited long enough. Make your choice." Ethan looked at the faces watching him. Some curious, some impatient, some already resigned. He thought about Catherine's sad wisdom, Margaret's relieved honesty. He thought about his mother's warning and his father's threats, and the 3 generations of Calloway history pressing down on this moment. Then he thought about Lila in the East pasture at dawn, choosing honesty over safety. "I can't," Ethan said. The room went still. "Excuse me?" Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. I can't choose any of them. I won't. You won't. Marcus came around the desk slowly. You understand what you're saying? What you're throwing away? Yes. The ranch, the land, your inheritance, your name, everything. I understand. Thomas Beaumont stood abruptly. This is absurd. We came here in good faith, Marcus. You assured us your son was prepared to make a serious commitment. He is serious, Catherine said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Just not about any of us. Catherine, her father started. It's true. She looked at Ethan with something like sympathy. He's in love with someone else. Have been the whole time. Anyone paying attention could see it. Then this entire exercise has been a waste, James Delaney said coldly. We've spent 2 weeks here under false pretenses. Not false, Marcus cut in, his face flushed with anger. My son is simply being a fool, but that ends now. He turned to Ethan. You have 30 seconds to reconsider. Choose one of these women, or I swear I will disown you where you stand. Who is she? Margaret asked, ignoring Marcus entirely. This woman you're willing to lose everything for? Ethan hesitated. Saying it out loud would make it real, make it impossible to take back. But that's what he wanted, wasn't it? No more pretending, no more performance. Her name is Lila Hart. She works in the stables. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Margaret laughed. A genuine, surprised sound. A stable hand? You're throwing away an empire for a stable hand? She's more than that. I'm sure she is to you. Margaret shook her head. But to everyone else in this room, she's nobody. No family, no wealth, no value beyond manual labor. That's not true. It's absolutely true, Thomas Beaumont interjected. And it's exactly why this match is impossible. You'd be marrying so far beneath your station that you'd never recover socially. Your children would be— Enough! Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stared at Ethan with an expression that mixed fury and something that might have been grief. Get out. Father, I said get out. You're no longer my son, no longer a Calloway. I want you off this property by sundown with whatever you can carry. Marcus pulled a paper from his desk drawer, already prepared, Ethan realized with a sick jolt. His father had known this was coming. I'm signing the ranch over to my nephew, David. He'll inherit everything. You get nothing. The finality in his voice was crushing. This wasn't anger that would fade. This was permanent. Marcus, perhaps we should— Eleanor started from the doorway. Stay out of this. Marcus didn't even look at his wife. This is his choice. He wants to throw his life away for some girl with dirt under her nails? Fine. But he does it without my name, my money, or my land. Ethan felt the room spinning slightly. He'd known this was coming, had prepared himself for it, but the reality hit harder than he'd expected. 26 years of being Marcus Calloway's son, the heir to an empire, the future of a legacy, gone in 30 seconds. I'm sorry, he said, though he wasn't sure who he was apologizing to. Sorry doesn't rebuild what you just destroyed. Marcus picked up a pen, signed the document with hard, angry strokes. David will be here tomorrow to begin learning the operation. You have until sunset to leave. The families filed out, some angry, some uncomfortable, some just ready to escape the wreckage. Catherine paused at the door. I hope she's worth it, she said softly. She is. Then I hope you survive long enough to find out if that's true. She left, and Ethan was alone with his father. You could have had everything, Marcus said without looking up from the papers he was organizing. The ranch, the respect, a place in the world that meant something, and you traded it for a fantasy that won't last 6 months. You're wrong. We'll see. Marcus finally met his eyes, and the coldness there was worse than anger. When you're broke and broken, and she's left you for someone who can actually provide for her, when you're sitting in the dirt with nothing, you remember this moment, remember that you chose it. Ethan turned and walked out, his legs somehow carrying him through the house, down the steps, across the yard to the stables where Lila was waiting. She took one look at his face and knew. He disowned you. Yes. And the ranch? Goes to his nephew. Lila pressed her hands to her mouth, and fresh tears started. What have we done? We chose each other. Ethan pulled her close. That's what we did. But at what cost? I don't know yet. He kissed her forehead, breathing in the smell of hay and horses and her. but we'll figure it out. They packed what little they owned: Ethan's clothes, Lila's few possessions, some food from the cookhouse that the staff quietly provided despite Marcus's orders. The hands avoided looking at them directly, embarrassed or sympathetic or just uncomfortable with witnessing the heir's fall from grace. By 4 in the afternoon, they were loading a wagon that Lila had quietly bought with her savings over the years. It wasn't much. Old, patched, barely functional. But it was theirs. Eleanor found them as they were finishing. "Take this." She pressed a small purse into Ethan's hand. "It's not much, but it's mine. Your father can't touch it." "Mother." "Don't argue. You're going to need every dollar you can get." She looked at Lila, really looked at her for the first time. "I hope you understand what you've taken on. My son has never been without. He doesn't know how to be poor." "I'll teach him," Lila said steadily. "Will you?" Eleanor's gaze was sharp. "Or will you resent him when reality sets in? When love stops being enough to fill your stomach or warm your bed?" "I don't know," Lila admitted, "but we're going to find out." Something in Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "At least you're honest. That's more than most people manage." She turned back to Ethan. "Write to me. Not here. He'll intercept anything sent to the ranch. But you can send letters through Maggie Brennan in town. She'll get them to me." "You'll get in trouble." "Probably." Eleanor smiled sadly. "But you're still my son, even if your father doesn't want to admit it." She left before either of them could respond, disappearing back into the house where she'd spend the rest of her life, with a man whose hardness had finally shattered the family he'd built. They left as the sun touched the western mountains, painting everything gold and red. Ethan looked back once at the ranch, the house, the barns, the endless acres rolling away toward the horizon. Everything he'd ever known, everything he'd been raised to inherit. Gone. "You okay?" Lila asked from beside him on the wagon seat. "Ask me in a year." She took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "Where are we going?" "I don't know. East, maybe. Somewhere we can start over." They drove through town as dusk settled, and Ethan could feel eyes on them. Curious, judgmental, pitying. The story would spread fast. Marcus Calloway's son, disowned for a stable girl. By tomorrow, it would be all anyone talked about. They spent that first night camped outside town, lying under the wagon and staring up at the stars. The ground was hard, the blankets thin, the future uncertain. "I'm scared," Lila whispered. "Me too." "What if your father's right? What if this doesn't work?" Ethan rolled to face her. "Then we'll fail together. That's more than most people get." She kissed him, and in that moment, with nothing but each other and the clothes on their backs, Ethan felt something he'd never felt in the ranch house. Free. It wouldn't last. He knew that. Reality would come crashing in with bills and hunger and work that broke your back for pennies. But right now, under the stars, with Lila's hand in his and no expectations weighing him down, he felt lighter than he had in years. They headed east the next morning, following roads Ethan barely knew toward towns he'd only heard about. The money his mother gave them would last a few weeks if they were careful. After that, they'd need to find work, a place to settle, some way to build a life from nothing. 3 days later, in a small settlement called Blackwood Ridge, they stopped at a trading post to buy supplies. The owner, a weathered man named Garrett, studied them with the shrewd eye of someone used to reading people. "You two running from something?" he asked while measuring out flour. "Running toward something," Lila corrected. "Same thing, usually." Garrett wrapped the flour in brown paper. "You got work lined up?" "Not yet." "Can you handle horses?" "Better than most people handle their children," Lila said, and Garrett laughed. "My stable hand quit last week. Took off for the goldfields like an idiot. I need someone who knows the difference between a bridle and a halter. Job pays room and board plus $30 a month. It ain't much." Lila looked at Ethan. He nodded. "We'll take it," she said. "Both of you?" "We're a package deal." Garrett considered this, then shrugged. "Fine, but the quarters are small, one room above the stable, and I expect a full day's work for that wage." "You'll get it," Ethan promised. They moved into the room that afternoon, barely bigger than a closet, with a single narrow bed and a window that didn't close properly. The wind whistled through gaps in the walls. The floor was uneven. Water stained one corner where the roof leaked. Lila set down her bag and looked around. Well, this is it. It's not the Calloway Ranch. No. She turned to him. It's ours. That's better. They fell into a rhythm over the following weeks. Up before dawn to feed and water Garrett's horses, mucking stalls, mending tack, dealing with travelers who needed fresh mounts or repairs. The work was constant and hard, and the $30 a month barely covered necessities. Ethan learned what real labor felt like. Not the oversight and management he'd done on the ranch, but actual backbreaking physical work that left his hands blistered and his muscles screaming. He learned what it meant to be truly tired, to collapse into bed with barely enough energy to eat first. He learned what it felt like to be nobody. People in Blackwood Ridge didn't know or care who the Calloways were. Ethan was just another drifter, another hand trying to scrape by. No respect came with his name, no deference with his presence. He was judged entirely by the quality of his work and the strength of his character. It was humbling and liberating in equal measure. Lila thrived in ways that surprised him. Without the weight of social hierarchy crushing her down, she bloomed. She was faster with the horses than Garrett had seen in years, better at reading their moods and needs. Within a month, travelers were specifically asking for her expertise. "You got a gift," Garrett told her one evening. "Ways to keep you here full time. You could start your own operation, train horses for wealthy buyers, make real money." "Maybe someday," Lila said. "Right now we need steady work more than big dreams." But Ethan saw the spark in her eyes, the first glimmer of possibility beyond just survival. Winter came hard that year. The room above the stable was poorly insulated, and they burned through firewood faster than they could afford to replace it. There were nights they went to bed hungry to save money for heating, mornings when ice coated the inside of the window and getting out of bed felt impossible. "Still think you made the right choice?" Lila asked one particularly brutal night, both of them huddled under every blanket they owned. "Yes." "Even like this? Cold and poor and barely getting by?" Ethan pulled her closer. "Especially like this. Because it's real. We're building something that's actually ours, not just inheriting someone else's vision." "That's pretty words for freezing to death." "We're not freezing to death. Give it another hour." But she was smiling. Letters arrived occasionally from his mother, routed through the contacts she'd mentioned. They were brief, carefully worded to avoid Marcus's notice if intercepted. The ranch was doing well under David's management. Marcus hadn't mentioned Ethan's name once. Eleanor missed him, but understood why he'd made his choice. Reading them hurt in ways Ethan wasn't prepared for. Reminders of everything he'd left behind, everything he'd chosen to lose. "You could go back," Lila said once, watching him reread a letter. "If you apologized, if you agreed to his terms." "No." "Ethan, I mean it. I'm not going back. That life, that version of who I was supposed to be, it would kill something essential in me. I'd rather be cold and poor with you than warm and rich without you." "You say that now, but winter's getting worse, and we're one disaster away from losing even this." She gestured at their cramped room. "What happens if one of us gets sick? If we can't work? We've got no safety net, no backup plan. Then we figure it out, together." "That's not a plan. That's faith." Lila stood, paced the small space. "And faith doesn't pay the doctor when you're burning with fever." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm scared." She turned to face him, and her expression was raw. "I'm scared that your father was right. That love isn't enough. That we're going to crash hard, and you're going to wake up one day and resent me for everything you gave up." Ethan crossed to her, took her face in his hands. "I'm not going to resent you." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because every morning I wake up next to you, even in this freezing shoebox of a room, I'm grateful. Grateful I don't have to pretend anymore. Grateful I get to build something real instead of just maintaining something inherited. And when that's not enough, when gratitude doesn't fill your stomach or warm your bones, then we'll deal with it then." He kissed her forehead. "But we'll deal with it together. That's the deal, remember? We fail together or succeed together. No middle ground." She leaned into him, and they stood like that for a long time while the wind howled outside and winter pressed in from all sides. By February, they'd saved almost nothing. Every dollar went to survival, food, firewood, repairs to their boots and clothes. The dream of starting their own horse operation felt impossibly distant. Then Garrett approached them with an offer. "I'm getting old," he said bluntly, "and this place is too much for me to manage alone. I need a partner, Someone younger who can handle the physical work while I focus on the business side. We don't have money for a partnership, Ethan said. Didn't ask for money. I'm asking for sweat equity. You two work the stable, build up the operation, and in 5 years we split ownership 50-50. I get to retire comfortable. You get a real stake in something. Lila and Ethan exchanged glances. That's generous, Lila said carefully. Why us? Because you work harder than anyone I've seen in 20 years. Because you're honest. And because I don't have kids of my own to leave this to. Garrett shrugged. Call it enlightened self-interest. I need partners I can trust. You need a future beyond scraping by. We help each other. What's the catch? No catch. Just commitment. You walk away before the 5 years, you get nothing. But you stay, put in the work, build this place into something better. You get half of everything. It was the opportunity they'd been hoping for, the chance to transform struggle into actual progress. But 5 years was a long time to commit to one place, one future, one gamble. Can we think about it? Ethan asked. Take a week. But I need an answer soon. Got other folks interested if you're not. That night they talked until dawn, weighing options, imagining futures, trying to balance caution against opportunity. It could work, Lila said. We're good with horses, better than good. If we expand the operation, focus on training and breeding instead of just boarding. There's real money in that. 5 years, though. That's a long time. What else are we going to do? Keep scraping by on $30 a month forever? She sat up, her eyes bright with possibility. This is what we've been working toward, a chance to build something real. What if it fails? Then we're no worse off than we are now. Lila took his hand. Ethan, I know you're scared. I am too. But we can't live in fear forever. At some point, we have to take a risk on ourselves. He thought about his father, about calculated alliances and strategic marriages and building empires on other people's foundations. Marcus had never taken a real risk in his life. He'd only made moves that were already guaranteed to succeed. And look where that had gotten him. Powerful, wealthy, respected, and completely alone. Okay, Ethan said. Let's do it. They told Garrett the next morning, and the old man's weathered face split into a genuine smile. Smart choice. We'll draw up papers. Make it official. Welcome to partnership. Over the following months, they threw themselves into the work with renewed purpose. Not just maintaining the stable, but expanding it. Building better facilities, improving the quality of horses they boarded, reaching out to wealthy buyers interested in trained mounts. Lila's talent became increasingly obvious. She could gentle a wild horse faster than anyone Ethan had ever seen, read their temperaments with uncanny accuracy. Word spread, and soon people were traveling from surrounding territories specifically to have her train their animals. The money improved, not dramatically, but enough to stop the constant terror of one expense away from disaster. They could afford better food, warmer clothes, occasional luxuries that had seemed impossible months ago. And slowly, painfully, they started to build something that felt like a future. But success brought its own complications. As their reputation grew, so did attention from the kind of people who'd known Ethan in his previous life. Travelers from Wyoming, families with connections to the cattle operations his father had dealt with. Most didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight. His hands were calloused and scarred. His clothes were working-class practical. He looked nothing like Marcus Calloway's polished heir. But some did. Ethan? Ethan Calloway? He turned to find James Merrick, one of the 5 fathers who'd brought their daughters to the ranch 6 months ago. The man looked shocked, as if he'd seen a ghost. I heard you'd been disowned, but I didn't believe it. Merrick's eyes traveled over Ethan's worn clothes, his work-roughened appearance. My God, what happened to you? I made a choice. You made a mistake. Merrick shook his head. Throwing away your inheritance for... He caught sight of Lila leading a horse into the stable. For her, that stable girl? Her name is Lila, and yes. You're insane. You could have had everything. Wealth, power, a place in society, and you traded it for this? Merrick gestured at the modest stable operation with obvious contempt. This is mine, Ethan said quietly. Everything I had before was borrowed, built by someone else, maintained by someone else's rules. This is real. Real poverty. Real freedom. Merrick studied him for a long moment, Then his expression shifted to something like pity. Your father was right about you. You're a romantic fool with no understanding of how the world works. He started to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Sarah, my daughter, she married a banker from Denver. Good family, solid prospects. They seem happy enough. That could have been your life. I hope she's happy, Ethan said, and meant it. Merrick left, and Lila appeared at Ethan's elbow. You okay? Yeah. He pulled her close, just remembering what I escaped. That night, lying in their narrow bed above the stable, Lila traced the calluses on Ethan's palm. Do you ever regret it? She asked. When people like Merrick show up and remind you what you gave up? No. He laced his fingers through hers. Sometimes I miss my mother. Sometimes I wonder about the ranch, how it's doing under David. But regret? Never. Not for a second. Even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard, because the hard parts are ours. We earned them. That means something. She kissed him, and in the darkness of their small room, with winter finally starting to loosen its grip and spring pressing up from the frozen ground, Ethan felt something he'd never felt in his father's empire. He felt like himself. Spring arrived slowly, grudgingly, like it resented having to show up at all. The snow melted into mud that sucked at boots and made every task twice as hard. But beneath the mess, something was stirring in the land, in the business, in Ethan and Lila themselves. The stable operation was growing faster than any of them had anticipated. Lila's reputation spread through the territories like wildfire. People came from 3 states away to have her work with their difficult horses, their valuable breeding stock, their prized animals that nobody else could handle. She had a gift that couldn't be taught, only recognized, and smart buyers recognized it immediately. Money started coming in steadily. Not wealth, not the kind of fortune Ethan had walked away from, but enough to breathe without constantly calculating pennies, enough to start thinking beyond just survival. We need more space, Garrett said one morning, reviewing the books with satisfaction. We're turning away business because we don't have the facilities. If we expanded the stables, added proper training paddocks, maybe a covered arena, we could triple our capacity. That takes capital, Ethan pointed out, more than we've got saved. Bank loan. With our current earnings and growth trajectory, we'd qualify. Garrett looked between them. Question is whether you're ready to take on that kind of debt. It's a risk. Lila and Ethan exchanged glances. Risk had become familiar territory, but this was different. This was betting not just on themselves, but on a future they were still building one day at a time. How much? Lila asked. $3,000 for the expansion, I'm thinking. Maybe $4,000 if we do it right. Ethan felt his stomach drop. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million given where they'd started. But he looked at Lila's face and saw something there he'd come to trust. That particular expression she got when she was calculating odds and finding them acceptable. We do it, she said. But we do it smart. Phased construction. Build what we need first. Add luxury later. And we keep a reserve for emergencies. I'm not going to be one bad season away from losing everything we've built. Cautious, Garrett observed. I like it. Smart money moves careful. They spent the next 3 weeks planning every detail. Ethan discovered he had a head for numbers and logistics that he'd never fully used on his father's ranch. There, Marcus had made all the real decisions. Here, every choice mattered because every choice was his own. The bank meeting was tense. The manager, a thin man named Pritchard with wire-rimmed glasses and the permanent expression of someone smelling something foul, reviewed their proposal with obvious skepticism. You're asking for $3,000 based on 6 months of operation, Pritchard said. That's not much history to bet on. Look at the growth curve. Ethan pushed the ledgers across the desk. We've increased revenue 40% month over month. We're turning away customers. The demand is there. Demand is there now. Markets change. Not for this. Lila leaned forward. People with money always have horses, and horses always need training. We're not selling a product that goes out of fashion. We're providing a skill that's valuable in any economy. Pritchard studied her with those cold eyes. You're the horse trainer. Yes. And if something happens to you, if you get hurt, can't work, what then? The entire business model collapses. It was a legitimate concern, and they all knew it. Lila was the engine driving their success. Without her, they'd be just another stable competing with dozens of others. Then we train other people, Lila said. I'm already working with 2 apprentices, teaching them my methods. It won't be as fast as me working directly, but it creates redundancy. The knowledge doesn't live in just one person. That's assuming your methods can be taught. Everything can be taught if you're patient enough. Pritchard made a note, his pen scratching against paper with a sound like judgment being rendered. I'll need collateral. The stable itself, plus personal guarantees from all 3 partners. Done, Garrett said immediately. And if you default, you lose everything. The business, the property, any assets attached to the loan. Understand? They understood. This was the moment where they bet everything they'd built on their belief that they could build more. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The loan came through 2 weeks later. $3,000 that felt like both a fortune and a debt large enough to drown in. Construction started immediately. Local workers who needed the pay, lumber from the mill, long days of noise and sawdust and gradual transformation. Ethan worked alongside the crew, learning carpentry basics by necessity. His hands, already rough from stable work, developed new calluses, new scars. You don't have to do this, one of the workers, a man named Tom with arms like tree trunks, told him. You're the owner. You could supervise. Can't ask people to do work I won't do myself, Ethan said, hammering another nail into a support beam. Tom grunted approval. You're not like most wealthy folks. I'm not wealthy. You got $3,000 to expand a business. That's wealthy to people like me. Tom positioned the next board. But I'll give you this. You don't act like it. My last boss wouldn't touch a hammer if his life depended on it. Just barked orders and collected profits. Sounds like my father. Yeah? Tom glanced at him with curiosity. What's he do? Cattle ranching. Big operation out in Wyoming. Why aren't you there? Family business and all? Ethan drove another nail, focused on the precision of it. Didn't want the life he wanted for me. Brave or stupid? Haven't figured that out yet. Tom laughed, a deep sound that carried across the construction site. Well, you're doing something right. This place is going to be something special when it's done. The expansion took 2 months. 2 months of sawdust and sweat and slowly watching their vision take physical form. The new stables were larger, better ventilated, with proper drainage and stall designs that Lila had obsessed over. The training paddocks had good fencing and soft footing that wouldn't damage horses' legs. The covered arena wasn't fancy, but it was functional. A space where they could work year-round regardless of weather. By the time they finished in late June, the operation looked professional, legitimate, like something that belonged in the conversation with established breeding and training facilities. We did it, Lila said, standing in the new arena with wonder in her voice. We actually built this. Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders. You built this. I just helped. Don't sell yourself short. You've learned more about business in 6 months than most people learn in years. She leaned into him. Your father would be impressed, even if he'd never admit it. My father wouldn't see past the dirt under my fingernails. Then he's blind. Business exploded after the expansion. The increased capacity meant they could take on more clients, and the improved facilities attracted a wealthier class of customer. People who bred championship lines, who competed in prestigious shows, who had the money to pay premium prices for premium work. Leela hired 3 more apprentices, carefully selected young people who had the patience and instinct necessary for the work. She was a demanding teacher, exacting in her standards, intolerant of shortcuts or lazy thinking, but she was also generous with her knowledge, genuinely wanting to elevate others rather than hoarding her expertise. You're building a legacy, Ethan observed one evening, watching her work with one of the apprentices on reading a horse's body language. I'm building a system, Lila corrected. Legacies are for rich people. Systems are for people who need things to keep working after they're gone. What's the difference? Legacies are about ego. Systems are about survival. She demonstrated a calming technique, had the apprentice try it, corrected their hand position. When I die, I want the knowledge to survive. I want horses to keep being treated well, trained right. That's more important than having my name remembered. Ethan thought about his father's empire, built entirely around the Callaway name, dependent on Marcus's iron control. Without Marcus, would it survive? Or would it collapse under its own weight? He was starting to suspect the latter. Letters from his mother continued sporadically. The ranch was doing well financially. David was competent, if uninspired. Marcus's health was declining, though he refused to acknowledge it or slow down. Eleanor wrote carefully, never quite saying how lonely she was, but Ethan could read it between the lines. "You should go see her," Lila said after he'd read the latest letter aloud. "My father would throw me off the property." "So don't see your father, just your mother. Surely there's a way." Ethan wanted to, but the thought of returning to Wyoming, to the ranch, to everything he'd walked away from, it felt like regression, like admitting defeat. "Maybe after we're more established," he said, "when I can go back as an equal instead of a failure." Lila didn't argue, but he saw the disagreement in her eyes. She thought he was being proud. Maybe she was right. In August, they got a visitor that changed everything. Robert Ashford, Victoria's father, one of the 5 families from that disastrous gathering, arrived unannounced one afternoon while Ethan was working with a particularly stubborn mare in the training paddock. "Impressive setup you've got here," Ashford said by way of greeting. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Mr. Ashford, what brings you to Blackwood Ridge?" "Business in the area. Heard rumors about a horse training operation that's making waves." Ashford leaned against the fence, watching Ethan work. "Took me a while to connect it to Marcus Calloway's disgraced son, but here we are." "I'm not Marcus Calloway's anything anymore." "No, I suppose not." Ashford pulled a cigar from his pocket, lit it. "Heard he disowned you completely. Vicious business, that. I've known Marcus 20 years, never seen him so angry as the day you walked out. If you're here to gloat, I'm here because I need a good horse trainer, and apparently you've got the best in 3 states working for you." Ashford nodded toward Lila, who was working with another horse across the yard. "That her? The stable girl you threw everything away for?" "Her name is Lila, and yes." "She any good?" "The best." Ashford watched Lila work for several minutes, his expression thoughtful. "I've got a 3-year-old stallion. Beautiful bloodlines, temperament from hell. Thrown 6 riders, kicked a stable hand bad enough to break ribs. I'm about ready to geld him and sell him for meat, but my daughter, Victoria, you remember her, she thinks he's salvageable. Wants me to give him one last chance. And you want Lila to work with him, if she's as good as people say." Ashford named a price that made Ethan blink. More than they'd charged anyone, more than he'd thought possible for a single training job. "But I need her full attention, 3 months, exclusive contract. She works with him every day until he's either trained or confirmed untrainable. Yes or no?" Ethan looked at Lila, caught her eye across the yard. She'd been close enough to hear the conversation, and her expression was carefully neutral. "It's her decision," Ethan called back, "not mine." Lila finished with her current horse, handed it off to an apprentice, and walked over. She studied Ashford with the same assessing look she gave difficult animals. "Why should I take your job?" she asked bluntly. Ashford smiled. "Direct, I like that. You should take it because it pays well, because it's good for your reputation if you succeed, and because I'm offering you a chance to work with superior bloodlines. That stallion sire won championships across the country. If you can gentle him, prove he's trainable. You'll have wealthy buyers lining up for your services. And if I can't, then you've still got 3 months' pay, and you're no worse off than you are now." Ashford blew smoke into the air. "But I think you can. Victoria's got good instincts about horses. If she says he's salvageable, he probably is. He just needs someone who actually understands what they're doing." Lila glanced at Ethan, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded slightly. This was her call, but he trusted her judgment. "Bring him here," Lila said. "I don't work at other people's facilities. Too many variables I can't control. He comes to my space, my rules, my timeline." "Fair enough?" Ashford extended his hand. "We have a deal." They shook on it, and Ethan felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. This was a huge opportunity, exactly the kind of high-profile work that could elevate their operation to the next level. But it also meant 3 months of Lila working almost exclusively with one difficult animal, which would strain their other commitments. The stallion arrived a week later, and Ethan immediately understood why 6 riders had failed. The horse was magnificent, tall, powerfully built, with a coat like polished copper. But his eyes were wild, rolling with barely contained aggression. He'd been mishandled somewhere along the line, probably as a colt, and now trusted no one. "He's terrified," Lila said quietly, watching the stallion pace his new stall. "He's dangerous," the transport handler corrected. "Broke my partner's arm on the trip here. Mean as they come." "Fear looks like meanness when you don't know how to read it." Lila didn't approach the stall, just stood where the horse could see her without feeling threatened. Someone hurt him. Someone he should have been able to trust. Now he figures he'll hurt first, before anyone gets the chance. Can you fix him? I don't fix horses. I help them remember who they're supposed to be. Ethan watched her work with the stallion over the following weeks, and it was like watching a master class in patience. She didn't rush, didn't force, didn't try to dominate. She just showed up every day, consistent and calm, until the horse started to believe she wasn't a threat. It was brutal, slow work. There were setbacks, days when the stallion would regress, become aggressive again, and Lila would have to start over from scratch. She came back to their room some nights exhausted and frustrated, doubting whether she was making any progress at all. Maybe Ashford was right to consider gelding him, she said one evening, her voice thick with fatigue. Maybe some damage can't be undone. You don't believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore. She collapsed onto the bed. I've been working with him for 6 weeks and I still can't touch him without him trying to kick me. What if I'm wrong? What if he's just broken? Then you're wrong, but you won't know unless you see it through. She turned to look at him. When did you become the optimist? When I started believing in impossible things. He lay down beside her, like disgraced heirs and stable girls building something from nothing, like love being worth more than empires. You taught me that. I taught you to be delusional. Same thing. Lila laughed despite her exhaustion. You're an idiot. You're idiot. Yeah. She curled against him. My idiot. The breakthrough with the stallion came in the 8th week, suddenly and without warning. Lila was working with him in the covered arena, doing the same groundwork exercises she'd been doing for weeks, when the horse simply stopped resisting. It was like watching a wall crumble, all that fear and aggression draining away, replaced by something like trust. Lila froze, barely breathing, letting the moment settle. Then slowly, carefully, she approached. The stallion watched her but didn't move away. She touched his shoulder, and he flinched but held still. She ran her hand down his neck, murmuring softly, and the horse let out a long breath that sounded like surrender. Ethan, watching from outside the arena, felt tears sting his eyes. He'd seen Lila work miracles before, but this was different. This was watching someone prove that the worst damage could be healed, if you had enough patience and faith. After that, progress was rapid. Within 2 weeks, Lila had a saddle on him. Within 3, she was riding him around the arena. By the time Ashford returned for his evaluation in late October, the stallion was transformed. Still spirited, still powerful, but controlled. Responsive. A horse that could be trusted. Ashford walked around the animal slowly, his expression carefully neutral. Then he turned to Lila. I'll be honest. I didn't think you could do it. I was prepared to tell my daughter she'd been wrong, that some horses just can't be saved. He ran his hand along the stallion's neck, and the horse stood calm under the touch. But you proved me wrong. This is remarkable work. He did the work, Lila said. I just gave him a reason to try. Modest. I respect that. Ashford pulled an envelope from his pocket. Your payment, as agreed. Plus a bonus. Call it a thank you for making my daughter happy. He paused. I'll be spreading the word about your operation. You're going to get more business than you can handle. Might want to think about expanding again. After Ashford left, leading the transformed stallion into the transport trailer, Lila opened the envelope. Inside was more money than they'd made in the previous 4 months combined. We're solvent, she said quietly, staring at the bills. Really solvent. For the first time since we started, we're not one disaster away from losing everything. You did that. We did that. She looked at him. This doesn't work without both of us. You know that, right? I'm the one with the horse skills, but you're the one who keeps everything else running. The books, the client management, the logistics. I couldn't do this alone. Yes, you could. Maybe. She tucked the money back into the envelope. But I don't want to. That's the point. Word spread exactly as Ashford had promised. By November, they had a waiting list 6 months long. Wealthy clients from across the Western territories, all wanting Lila's expertise, all willing to pay premium prices for it. We need to expand again, Garrett said, reviewing the demand with something like awe. And we need to do it fast before someone else establishes a competing operation and siphons off this opportunity. We just expanded, Ethan pointed out. That was before. This is now. The market's changed. We need to change with it. They spent December planning. A second training facility on adjacent land they could lease, 4 more apprentices to handle the increased volume, a breeding program for their own stock, leveraging Lila's reputation to establish valuable bloodlines. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but they'd learned that success required betting on yourself before anyone else would. The planning process consumed them entirely. Long nights reviewing proposals, calculating costs, arguing about priorities. It was exhausting and exhilarating, building something bigger than themselves. In the midst of it all, in early December, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from Eleanor, but the handwriting was shaky, rushed. Your father collapsed yesterday. The doctor says his heart is failing. He's refusing treatment, refusing to slow down. I think he's dying, Ethan, and I don't know if he has months or weeks. Lila read the letter over Ethan's shoulder. You have to go, she said immediately. He doesn't want to see me. That doesn't matter. He's your father, and you'll regret it if you don't try. Ethan stared at the letter, at his mother's desperate handwriting. Part of him wanted to refuse, to let Marcus face his mortality alone, the way he'd forced Ethan to face his exile alone. But another part, the part that remembered being young and looking up to his father like he was invincible, that part couldn't let go. Come with me, he said to Lila. Are you sure? Your father disowned me because I chose you. If I'm going back even temporarily, you're coming. We're a unit. That doesn't change because Marcus is dying. They left the next morning, leaving Garrett and the apprentices to manage the operation. The journey west took 3 days by train, then another day by hired wagon. Every mile closer to the ranch, Ethan felt old anxieties resurface, the weight of expectations, the fear of not measuring up, the sensation of being trapped in someone else's vision of who he should be. You okay? Lila asked as the ranch came into view. No. Ethan stared at the land he'd grown up on, the empire his father had built. But I will be. The ranch looked exactly the same, as if time had stopped the day Ethan left, preserving everything in amber. Same buildings, same fences, same endless acres rolling toward the mountains. Eleanor met them at the main house. She looked older, more worn, but her face transformed when she saw Ethan. You came. Of course I came. He embraced her, felt how thin she'd gotten. How is he? Dying. Eleanor pulled back, looked at Lila. And you must be the woman my son loves enough to lose everything for. Yes, ma'am. Eleanor, please, we're family now, whether Marcus likes it or not. She gestured toward the house. He's upstairs. The doctor says it could be days, could be weeks. His heart's just worn out. Does he know I'm here? Not yet. He's been asleep most of the day. Eleanor hesitated. He's very weak, Ethan. Don't expect the man you remember. They found Marcus in his bedroom, propped up on pillows, looking smaller than Ethan had ever seen him. The man who'd loomed so large in his life, who'd seemed unbreakable, was just human after all, fragile and fading. Marcus's eyes opened as they entered. For a moment there was no recognition. Then awareness clicked in, and with it, a flash of the old hardness. Get out, Marcus rasped. Marcus, Eleanor started. I said get out. I don't have a son. Disowned him months ago. You can disown me legally, Ethan said, standing his ground. But you can't change biology. I'm still your son, and you're still my father. Not anymore. You made your choice. And you made yours. We're both living with the consequences. Ethan moved closer to the bed. I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or to beg to be let back into the family. I'm here because you're dying, and despite everything, I didn't want your last memory of me to be walking away. Marcus stared at him with those cold eyes, and for a long moment Ethan thought he'd just order them out again. But then something shifted in the old man's expression, not softening exactly, but maybe exhaustion. The weariness of maintaining walls that took too much energy to hold anymore. You look different, Marcus said finally. I am different. Working man's hands, working man's clothes. You're not a Calloway anymore. No, Ethan agreed. I'm something better. I'm myself. Marcus closed his eyes. You think you won. You think you proved me wrong. This isn't about winning. It never was. Everything's about winning. That's what you never understood. The world is competition. You either dominate or get dominated, build or get buried. Or you build something different, Ethan said, something that doesn't require crushing everyone around you to succeed. Naive. But Marcus's voice was weaker, lacking the force it had once carried. You'll learn. When the money runs out, when the romance fades, when real problems hit, you'll learn that love doesn't feed cattle or pay mortgages or protect what's yours. Maybe. Or maybe you're wrong. Marcus opened his eyes again, looked past Ethan to where Lila stood in the doorway. That her? Yes. Come here, Marcus ordered. Lila approached slowly, stopping at the foot of the bed. She met Marcus's stare without flinching, and Ethan felt a surge of pride. This was the woman who'd refused to be intimidated by wealth or power or status. She certainly wasn't going to be intimidated by a dying man's anger. You destroyed my son's life, Marcus said. No, sir, Lila replied calmly. I gave him a chance to build his own. You took him from his birthright. He walked away from it himself. I just gave him a reason to believe he could. Marcus studied her for a long moment. You love him? More than anything. And when the money's gone, when you're old and tired and the romance has worn off, then we'll be old and tired together. Still sounds better than being old and alone. The barb landed, and Ethan saw his father wince. Marcus looked at Eleanor, standing silent in the corner, and something passed between them. 30 years of strategic alliance and emotional distance compressed into a single glance. Get out, Marcus said again, but this time it sounded more like fatigue than anger. All of you. I need to rest. They left him there, small and diminished in the bed that had once seemed like a throne. Ethan and Lila stayed at the ranch for 3 days, hovering in a strange limbo. Marcus wouldn't see Ethan again, but he didn't order them to leave either. Eleanor was grateful for the company, the distraction from watching her husband slowly fade. On the second day, David showed up, Marcus's nephew, the man who'd inherited everything Ethan had been raised to claim. He was competent and cold, a younger version of Marcus without any of the original's fire. You're not welcome here, David said when he found Ethan in the stables. I'm not here for you. I'm here for my mother. Your mother who you abandoned when you ran off with that stable girl? I didn't abandon anyone. I made a choice. There's a difference. David crossed his arms. You made a selfish choice. You put your own desires ahead of family responsibility. And now you come crawling back when the old man's dying, hoping to guilt your way into some kind of inheritance. I don't want the inheritance. Bullshit. I mean it. Ethan turned to face his cousin fully. You can have the ranch, the land, all of it. I don't want it anymore. I've built something of my own, something that actually matters to me. This, he gestured at the vast empire around them. This was never really mine. It was always his. And now it's yours. You're welcome to it. David looked suspicious, like he was waiting for the trap. You really don't want it back. No. But I do want my mother to be okay after he's gone. I want her taken care of, not just financially, but emotionally. Can you promise me that? She's family. That's not a promise. David was quiet for a moment. I'll look after her. She deserves better than being a widow in a house full of ghosts. It was the best Ethan was going to get. He nodded and David left, back to the work of running an empire he'd inherited by default. On the third day, Marcus died. Quietly, in his sleep, with Eleanor holding his hand. He never asked to see Ethan again, never softened toward the son who'd defied him. He died angry and unforgiving, exactly as he'd lived. The funeral was huge. Seemingly every rancher, politician, and businessman in the territory showed up to pay respects to Marcus Calloway, the man who'd built an empire from nothing. They talked about his vision, his strength, his uncompromising nature. They called him a titan, a legend, a man who'd shaped the West itself. Nobody mentioned that he'd died alone in the ways that actually mattered, that he'd driven away his only son, that his marriage had been strategic from the start, that his empire was built on fear and calculation rather than genuine connection. Ethan stood at the back of the crowd with Lila, listening to the eulogies, and felt something complicated shifting inside him. Not forgiveness. He wasn't sure he'd ever fully forgive Marcus for the ultimatum that had forced his choice, but maybe understanding. Marcus had been a product of his time and circumstances, doing the best he knew how with the tools he had. That his best had been harsh and lonely didn't make it less genuine. "You okay?" Lila whispered. "I don't know." Ethan watched them lower his father's casket into the ground. "I'm sad, but I'm also relieved, and I feel guilty about being relieved. It's all tangled up. That's grief. It's never clean." After the funeral, Eleanor pulled them aside. "I'm leaving the ranch," she said. "David can have it. I'm moving east to my sister's place in Boston. I've spent 30 years in Wyoming, and I'm tired of the cold." "When?" Ethan asked. "Next month. I just need to settle some affairs first." She looked between them. "But I want you to have something. Your father would hate this, but he's dead, so he doesn't get a vote anymore." She handed Ethan a bank draft that made his eyes widen. "Mother, I can't." "Yes, you can. It's my money from my family. Marcus never controlled it. I've been saving it for years, and I want you to have it. Build your business, expand your operation, make something that actually makes you happy." Eleanor smiled. "Consider it a wedding gift." "We're not married," Lila said. "Then get married. Life's too short to waste time on technicalities." They left Wyoming the next morning, the bank draft safely tucked away, carrying with them the complicated legacy of Marcus Calloway and the simpler gift of Eleanor's belief in their future. On the train heading east, watching the landscape roll past, Ethan felt the last ties to his old life finally sever. He'd faced his father, said goodbye, and emerged on the other side still himself, still committed to the path he'd chosen. "You're really okay?" Lila asked, her head on his shoulder. "Yeah." He kissed her hair. "I really am. That life, that version of who I was supposed to be, it died with him. And I'm okay with that. What do we do with your mother's gift? Build something bigger, something that lasts, something that proves love isn't just enough. It's everything." Lila lifted her head, looked at him with those sharp green eyes. "That's ambitious. So are we." She smiled, and Ethan realized that somewhere in the past year, he'd stopped measuring his life by what he'd lost and started measuring it by what he'd gained. The shift had been gradual, almost invisible, but now it was complete. He'd lost an empire. But he'd found something worth more than empires. He'd found himself. They returned to Blackwood Ridge in mid-December, with Eleanor's gift burning a hole in both their pockets and their ambitions. The money was substantial, enough to transform their modest operation into something that could compete with the established breeding facilities back east. "We could build a proper training complex," Garrett said when they told him about the windfall. "Indoor arenas, climate-controlled stables, living quarters for long-term clients who want to stay with their horses during training. Make this a destination, not just a service." "That's thinking big," Ethan said. "Why think small? You've got the capital, you've got the reputation, you've got the demand. Only question is whether you've got the nerve." Lila looked at Ethan, and he saw the question there. They'd already bet everything once. Were they ready to do it again? "We build it," Lila said. "But we do it right. No shortcuts, no compromises on quality. If we're going to compete with the big operations, we need to match them in every way that matters." They broke ground in January, hiring a crew twice the size of their first expansion. The winter made construction brutal: frozen ground, snow delays, equipment failures. But the work continued, relentless and exhausting. Ethan found himself managing the entire operation while Lila handled the training commitments they couldn't postpone. He coordinated workers, negotiated with suppliers, solved problems that seemed to multiply faster than he could address them. Some days he worked 16 hours straight, falling into bed too tired to think. "You're running yourself into the ground," Lila said one night, watching him review construction plans by lamplight despite his exhaustion. "We're behind schedule. The indoor arena's framing is wrong. If we don't catch it now, we'll have structural problems later. And if you collapse from exhaustion, who's going to manage anything?" She took the plans from his hands. "You need to delegate more. That's why we have supervisors." "I don't trust them to see what I see." "Then you're going to kill yourself trying to do everything alone." Lila set the plans aside. "This is what your father did. Controlled every detail, trusted no one, worked himself to death because he couldn't let go." The comparison stung because it was accurate. Somewhere in the pressure of building something bigger, Ethan had started replicating the patterns he'd run from. "I'm not like him," he said, but it sounded defensive even to his own ears. "Not yet." But you're heading that direction. Lila's voice was gentle but firm. You've got good people working for you. Let them do their jobs. You can't build an empire by micromanaging every nail. I don't want an empire. Then what do you want? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I want something that lasts. Something that proves walking away from my father wasn't a mistake. And you think killing yourself with work proves that? I think showing I can succeed without his name, without his connections, without any of the advantages I was born with, yeah, that proves something. Lila took his face in her hands, made him look at her. You've already proven it. We built this from nothing. We survived when everyone said we'd fail. You don't have anything left to prove to anyone, including yourself. Then why does it still feel like I'm trying to? Because your father's voice is still in your head, and it's going to be there for a long time, but that doesn't mean you have to listen to it. She was right. He knew she was right, but knowing something intellectually and believing it emotionally were different things entirely. The construction continued through winter and into spring. Slowly, expensively, the complex took shape. A main stable building that could house 40 horses comfortably, 2 indoor arenas with advanced footing systems, a covered round pen for detailed training work, and living quarters for visiting clients. It was ambitious. Maybe too ambitious. The costs kept climbing, and even with Eleanor's gift, they were burning through capital at an alarming rate. We're over budget, Ethan told Garrett in March, reviewing the books with growing anxiety. By almost 20%. If we hit any more unexpected expenses, then we'll deal with them. We're building something significant here. That takes money. Money we might not have. Have some faith. We've got reservations already booked for the new facilities. Once we're operational, revenue will more than cover the construction costs. But faith was harder to maintain when looking at ledgers that showed their reserves dwindling towards zero. One major setback, one significant delay, and they'd be in serious trouble. The setback came in April, sudden and devastating. A spring storm rolled through with unusual ferocity, bringing winds that tore part of the roof off the main stable building. The damage was extensive, not just the roof, but water damage to the interior, ruined materials, structural problems that needed immediate attention. The contractor gave them an estimate that made Ethan's stomach drop. $15,000 to repair and complete the work. They had $8,000 left in reserves. We're $7,000 short, Ethan said, staring at the numbers like they might change if he looked hard enough. Bank loan, Garrett suggested. We already have one loan. Take in another one. If we can't make the payments, we lose everything, not just the expansion, but the original operation too. So what's the alternative? Leave it half finished? We've got clients expecting to use these facilities in 3 months. Ethan looked at Lila, hoping she'd have an answer, but her expression was as troubled as his own. We need to think about this carefully, she said. Taking on more debt when we're already overextended, that's how people lose everything. But walking away from the construction means we've already lost Eleanor's gift, plus everything we've invested. At least with the loan, we have a chance. They spent the next 2 days arguing in circles, stress and fear, making both of them shorter-tempered than usual. It was the closest they'd come to a real fight since leaving Wyoming. You're being too cautious, Ethan said during one particularly heated discussion. And you're being reckless. Just like when you chose me over your inheritance, betting everything on emotion instead of logic. That worked out, didn't it? Did it? We're broke, Ethan. We're one disaster away from losing everything we've built. Maybe your father was right. Maybe love isn't enough when reality comes knocking. The words hung in the air like poison. Lila looked horrified the moment they left her mouth. But the damage was done. Do you really think that? Ethan asked quietly. No, I'm sorry. I'm scared. And when I'm scared, I say stupid things. So do I. He pulled her close. But we're not going to lose everything. We've survived worse than this. Have we? Because this feels pretty bad. They decided on the loan. It was a risk, potentially a fatal one, but the alternative was watching their dream collapse halfway to completion. Pritchard at the bank was skeptical, but ultimately approved it, probably because they still had the original loan payment history showing reliability. You're betting your entire operation on completing this expansion, Pritchard warned. If it doesn't generate the revenue you're projecting, you'll default on both loans, and then you'll lose everything, the new construction and the original stable. Understand? They understood. They signed anyway. The repairs and construction resumed, racing against the clock to finish before the first clients were scheduled to arrive. The crew worked through rain and heat and exhaustion, pushing to meet deadlines that kept shifting further into the future. Ethan and Lila worked alongside them, doing whatever needed doing, hauling materials, painting stalls, installing equipment. They were supervisors and laborers and janitors and everything in between. Some nights they were too tired to eat, just collapsed into bed covered in sawdust and paint. "Remember when we thought this would be easier?" Lila asked one night, both of them lying on their backs staring at the ceiling. "I don't think I ever thought it would be easy." "Just worth it then." "Yeah, worth it. Is it?" She turned to look at him. Honest answer. Is this worth what it's costing us? The money, the stress, the constant terror that we're one mistake away from losing everything? Ethan thought about it seriously. "Ask me when it's finished." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got right now." The complex was completed in late June, 2 months behind schedule and significantly over budget. But it was done. And it was spectacular. The kind of facility that made wealthy buyers stop and take notice. The kind of operation that could compete with anyone in the Western Territories. Their first major client arrived in July, a steel magnate from Pittsburgh named Harrison Cole, who'd heard about Lila's work with Ashford's stallion. He brought 3 horses that needed training and enough money to make a real dent in their loan obligations. "Impressive setup," Cole said, walking through the new stables. "I've seen facilities in Kentucky that aren't this well designed." "We built it for serious work," Lila said. "Everything's optimized for the horse's well-being and training effectiveness." "That's what I want to hear. My horses are investments, championship bloodlines, high-value breeding potential. I need them trained by someone who understands what they're worth." Cole stayed for 3 weeks, observing Lila's training methods with increasing approval. By the time he left, he'd not only paid for the initial training, but had signed a contract for ongoing work with his entire stable. "He's going to tell everyone he knows," Garrett said after Cole departed. "This is exactly the kind of client who opens doors." Garrett was right. By August, they were fielding inquiries from wealthy buyers across the country. People who bred championship lines, who competed at the highest levels, who had the money to pay premium prices for premium work. The facility operated at near capacity through the summer and into fall. The revenue was substantial, more than enough to cover their loan payments with room to breathe. For the first time since the expansion started, Ethan felt like they might actually survive this. But success brought new complications. The operation was too large for just the 3 of them to manage anymore. They needed a real organizational structure, defined roles, people who could handle specific functions without constant oversight. "We need to hire a business manager," Ethan said during one of their planning sessions. "Someone who can handle the administrative work so we can focus on the actual training and operations." "That's another salary," Lila pointed out. "It's also sanity. We're drowning in paperwork. Bookkeeping, client contracts, scheduling, payroll for the apprentices. We need someone whose job is just managing that." They hired a woman named Margaret Chen, who'd managed a freight company's operations for 10 years before relocating to the territories. She was efficient, organized, and completely unimpressed by their bootstrap success story. "You've been running this place like a frontier operation," she said bluntly after reviewing their records. "No centralized scheduling, inconsistent pricing, no formal contracts with clients. It's a miracle you haven't been sued or lost money to miscommunication." "We've been busy," Ethan said, slightly defensive. "Being busy isn't an excuse for being sloppy. You want to compete with professional operations? You need professional systems." Margaret pulled out a notebook. "Here's what we're going to implement immediately. Standardized contracts, pricing tiers based on service complexity, proper bookkeeping that tracks every dollar, and client communication protocols so nothing falls through the cracks." She was right, and implementing her systems improved everything almost immediately. But it also meant acknowledging that their scrappy, informal approach wouldn't scale any further. They'd reached the limit of what passion and hard work alone could accomplish. In October, Robert Ashford returned with another job. This time his daughter Victoria came with him. "I wanted to see the operation that tamed thunder," Victoria said, referencing the stallion Lila had trained the previous year. "Father talks about you constantly, says you're the best trainer in the Western Territories." "I'm good with difficult horses," Lila said. "That's different from being the best." Modesty. Refreshing. Victoria walked through the stables with an appraising eye. You've built something remarkable here. From what I understand, you started with almost nothing. Less than nothing, but we started in debt. Victoria glanced at Ethan, who was working with one of the apprentices across the yard. And that's the man who gave up the Callaway Ranch for you? Yes. I remember him from that awful gathering his father arranged. He looked miserable then. Looks happy now. Victoria turned back to Lila. I always wondered if he'd regret choosing you. Looks like he doesn't. Some days are harder than others. That's honest. Most people would lie and say everything's perfect. Victoria's expression grew thoughtful. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. I might not answer. Do you ever feel guilty for being the reason he lost his inheritance? Lila was quiet for a moment. Every day. But feeling guilty and being guilty are different things. I didn't force his choice. I actually tried to talk him out of it. He chose me knowing exactly what it would cost. And if you could go back, if you could make him choose differently, I'd make the same choice I made then. Tell him to pick the smart option, marry into wealth, save his father's ranch. And I'd mean it. Lila met Victoria's eyes. But I'd still be grateful he didn't listen. Victoria smiled. I like you. You're more complicated than the simple love story people tell. People like simple stories, reality's messier. They worked with Victoria's horses for 6 weeks, 3 high-strung mares with excellent bloodlines and temperaments that needed careful handling. Lila's methods worked as effectively as ever, but Ethan noticed she seemed more tired than usual, moving slower, taking more breaks. You feeling okay? He asked one evening after she'd cut a training session short. Just worn out, it's been a long year. Maybe you should see a doctor. It's fatigue, Ethan, not illness. I'll rest when the current clients leave. But the fatigue didn't improve. If anything, it got worse. By November, Lila was struggling to maintain her usual schedule, and even simple tasks seemed to exhaust her. You're seeing a doctor, Ethan said firmly when she nearly collapsed after working with a particularly difficult gelding. This isn't normal tired. The doctor in Blackwood Ridge was a gruff man named Patterson who'd been practicing medicine for 30 years. He examined Lila thoroughly, asked pointed questions, and then delivered news that stopped Ethan's heart. You're pregnant. About 3 months along, near as I can tell. Lila stared at him. That's not possible. It's very possible. Common, even, for people who... No, I mean, we've been careful. We can't afford... She stopped, looked at Ethan with panic in her eyes. We can't afford a baby right now. We're barely managing the business as it is. Congratulations anyway, Patterson said dryly. You've got about 6 months to figure it out. In the meantime, you need to reduce your physical workload. No more working with dangerous horses, no heavy lifting, and you need proper rest and nutrition. They walked back to their quarters in silence, both processing the news. A baby. Something they'd vaguely discussed as a future possibility, but never seriously planned for. And now it was happening, whether they were ready or not. I can't stop training, Lila said finally. We need the income, the loans. We'll figure it out. How? I'm the one clients pay for. If I can't work with the difficult cases anymore, we lose our competitive advantage. Then we adapt. The apprentices can handle more. You can supervise instead of doing all the hands-on work. We make it work because we have to. Lila stopped walking, turned to face him. Are you okay with this? With having a baby now when everything's still so precarious? I'm terrified, Ethan admitted. But yeah, I'm okay with it. Are you? I don't know. I always thought if we had kids, it would be later. When we were established, secure, not when we're still figuring things out ourselves. Maybe there's never a perfect time. That's not comforting. It's true, though. He pulled her close. We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too. But surviving turned out to be harder than either of them anticipated. Lila's pregnancy was difficult from the start. Constant nausea, exhaustion that sleep didn't touch, complications that required frequent doctor visits they could barely afford. She tried to keep working, supervising from the sidelines while apprentices did the physical training. But it wasn't the same. Clients noticed. Some were understanding, willing to work with the modified approach. Others weren't, taking their business elsewhere because they'd paid for Lila's expertise specifically. Revenue dropped as winter set in. Not catastrophically, but enough to make their loan payments tight. Enough to bring back the familiar terror of being one disaster away from losing everything. We need to cut costs, Margaret said during a budget review in January. The apprentice salaries, the facility maintenance, there are places we can trim. We can't cut apprentice pay, Lila said immediately. They're already working for less than they're worth. Then what do you suggest? We're running -3 months in a row. At this rate, we'll miss a loan payment by March. I'll take on more clients, Lila said. You can't, Ethan countered. The doctor said, I know what the doctor said, but we don't have a choice. We either take the risk or we lose the business. There's always a choice. Not good ones. They argued about it for days, the stress amplifying every disagreement into something bigger. Money problems, pregnancy complications, business pressures. It all piled up until some days Ethan wondered if they'd actually survive this or if the weight would finally crush them. Maybe we should sell, Lila said one particularly bad night. Cut our losses while we still can, pay off the loans, start smaller somewhere else. You don't mean that, don't I? We're killing ourselves trying to maintain something that might be too big for us to handle. Maybe your father was right. Maybe we overreached. My father didn't know anything about what we're capable of. He knew about limits, about not betting more than you can afford to lose. Lila's voice cracked. And we might have bet too much. Ethan wanted to argue, to insist they'd be fine, that they just needed to push through this rough patch. But looking at Lila, exhausted, pregnant, scared, he couldn't force optimism he didn't fully feel. Let's get through the winter, he said finally. Reassess in spring. If things haven't improved by then, we'll consider other options. You're just delaying the inevitable. Maybe, or maybe things will get better. We won't know unless we try. February brought an unexpected reprieve in the form of Harrison Cole, the Pittsburgh steel magnate, returning with a proposal. I want to invest, Cole said directly. Buy a 20% stake in your operation. Gives you capital to weather this rough patch. Gives me a stake in what I think will be a very profitable business long term. Ethan and Lila exchanged glances. Investment meant giving up some control, bringing an outside partner into their carefully built operation. But it also meant survival. How much? Lila asked. Cole named a figure that would cover their immediate debts and leave substantial reserves. It was more than enough to stabilize their situation. What do you want in return? Besides the ownership stake. Exclusive rights to have my horses trained here. First priority on Lila's schedule once she's able to return to full training. And a say in major business decisions. I'm not interested in micromanaging day-to-day operations, but if you're considering another major expansion or significant change, I want a vote. That's reasonable, Garrett said. They'd brought him into the discussion since any investment affected his partnership too. Give us a week to think about it, Ethan said. Take 2. But understand, this offer expires if your situation becomes untenable. I'm interested in investing in a successful operation, not funding a rescue mission. After Cole left, they spent days debating the offer from every angle. Independence versus stability, control versus survival, pride versus pragmatism. I don't want to give up part of what we built, Lila said. Neither do I. But what's the alternative? We're barely holding on as it is. We could try for another bank loan. Pritchard already said no. We're too overextended. Cole's offer might be the only real option we have. Lila touched her growing belly, and something in her expression shifted. I don't want our child born into this stress, into us fighting constantly about money and worrying about losing everything. So we take the investment. She agreed, and we learned to live with sharing control. They accepted Cole's offer in late February. The capital injection stabilized everything almost immediately. Loan payments became manageable, operational costs were covered, and the constant low-grade panic that had been their companion for months finally eased. But success tasted different when it came with strings attached. Cole was true to his word about not micromanaging, but his presence was felt in every major decision. They were no longer entirely their own. The business they'd built from nothing now belonged partially to someone else. This is what growth looks like, Margaret said when Ethan expressed frustration about the change. You can't scale beyond a certain point without outside capital. Every successful business reaches this stage. I know. It just feels like we sold something we can't get back. You sold part of the ownership. You didn't sell your vision or your values. Cole's not trying to change what you do. He just wants to profit from you doing it well. She was right, but that didn't make it feel better. Lila gave birth in early May, a long, difficult labor that terrified Ethan more than anything he'd experienced. Watching her in pain, unable to help, feeling utterly powerless. It was worse than poverty, worse than disownment, worse than any business crisis they'd faced. But when the midwife finally placed their daughter in his arms, everything else disappeared. She was tiny, red-faced, screaming her displeasure at being thrust into the world. And she was theirs. "What should we name her?" Lila asked, exhausted but smiling. Ethan looked at his daughter, this tiny person who existed because two people had chosen love over logic, partnership over power, building something real over inheriting something hollow. "Eleanor," he said, "after my mother, if that's okay with you." "Eleanor?" Lila tested the name. "Yeah, that's right." They brought Eleanor home to quarters that suddenly felt too small for three people. The baby cried constantly, slept irregularly, and demanded attention that left both of them stumbling through days in an exhausted haze. "I don't know how people do this," Lila said one night after the third time they'd been woken up. "Poorly, probably. Just like we're doing it. That's not encouraging. It's honest." Despite the exhaustion, despite the challenges, something shifted in both of them. They'd built a business from nothing, survived every obstacle thrown at them, and now they'd created an actual human life. It was terrifying and overwhelming, and somehow made everything they'd been through feel worthwhile. "She's going to grow up here," Lila said one afternoon, watching Eleanor sleep in her cradle while horses worked in the arena outside. "She's going to learn that the world doesn't owe you anything, that if you want something, you build it yourself." That's a lot of pressure for a baby. It's reality. Better she learns it early. Lila looked at Ethan. "Your father tried to teach you that through control and fear. We'll teach her through example, through showing her that building something real is hard and worth it. Think we're good enough examples?" "I think we're honest ones. That's better than good." By midsummer, Lila was back to training part-time, though at a reduced intensity. The apprentices had stepped up admirably in her absence, and the business continued functioning even without her constant presence. It was proof that they'd built something sustainable, something that could survive beyond just the two of them. "We should get married," Ethan said one evening. "Why?" "Because we have a child. Because we've been partners in every way that matters. Because making it official seems like the right thing to do." Lila smiled. "That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. You want romance? You're with the wrong guy." "No," she said, taking his hand. "I'm with exactly the right guy. And yes, we should get married, but not because of Eleanor, or because it's the right thing. Because I want to. Because after everything we've been through, choosing each other deliberately one more time feels important." They married in August. A simple ceremony in the covered arena with Garrett, Margaret, the apprentices, and a few local friends as witnesses. No fancy clothes, no elaborate celebration, just two people who'd chosen each other over and over again, making that choice official one more time. Eleanor, Ethan's mother, traveled from Boston for the wedding, her first time seeing her granddaughter. She looked healthier than she had at Marcus's funeral, lighter somehow, as if distance from Wyoming had lifted a weight she'd been carrying for decades. "I'm proud of you," Eleanor said, holding baby Eleanor while watching Ethan and Lila exchange simple vows. "Your father was wrong about so many things, but mostly he was wrong about you. You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for." "I learned from watching you," Ethan said. "You survived 30 years of being underestimated. That takes its own kind of strength. Different from yours. You had the courage to walk away. I never did." "You're away now." "Yes," Eleanor smiled. "Better late than never." After the ceremony, as evening settled over the stables and their small gathering shared food and stories, Ethan stood with Lila watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "We did it," Lila said quietly. "Did what?" "Everything. Built a business. Survived being broke, had a baby, got married, proved that choosing each other wasn't a mistake." "You doubted it?" "Sometimes. When things were hard and money was tight and everything seemed impossible." She leaned against him. "But we're still here, still together, still building something real." Ethan looked at the complex they'd created, the stables, the arenas, the living quarters where their daughter slept. It wasn't an empire like his father had built. It wasn't inherited wealth or political power or territorial dominance. It was something better. It was theirs. And on the frontier where survival demanded more than just money, where success required grit and vision and the willingness to bet everything on what you believed in, they'd found something most people spent their whole lives searching for. They'd found home. The years that followed their wedding didn't get easier. They just got different. Eleanor grew from a screaming infant into a toddler with opinions about everything and the lung capacity to express them loudly. The business continued expanding, bringing new pressures and new opportunities in equal measure. And Ethan and Lila learned what every partnership eventually discovers: that choosing each other once is easy compared to choosing each other every single day when life grinds you down. By the time Eleanor was 3, the operation employed 20 people full-time and had earned a reputation that stretched from California to the eastern seaboard. Wealthy buyers came specifically for Lila's expertise, and the training methods she'd developed were being discussed in breeding circles as revolutionary. "You should write a book," Harrison Cole suggested during one of his visits. "Document your techniques. There's money in that, and it would cement your reputation as an authority." "I'm a horse trainer, not a writer," Lila said. "You're a businesswoman who happens to train horses. There's a difference." Cole gestured at the operation around them. "You've built something significant here. Might as well get credit for it beyond just word of mouth." The idea took root despite Lila's initial resistance. Over the following months, she started documenting her methods in the evenings after Eleanor was asleep, writing out the philosophy behind her approach, the specific techniques she used, the psychology of understanding what horses needed versus what people assumed they needed. "This is good," Ethan said, reading through her notes one night. "Really good. You explain things in a way that makes sense even to people who don't know horses. It feels self-indulgent, like I'm claiming to be some kind of expert." "You are an expert. That's not arrogance, it's fact. Your father would say I'm getting above my station, stable girl writing books like she's educated. My father's dead, and he was wrong about most things." Ethan set down the pages. "You're teaching people skills that matter. That's the opposite of self-indulgent." The book took 2 years to complete, stolen hours between training sessions and business management, and raising a child who seemed to inherit both her parents' stubbornness. When it was finally published, a modest print run through a small Western press, Lila didn't expect much beyond maybe helping a few scattered trainers improve their work. The response was overwhelming. Within 6 months, they'd gone through 3 printings. Trainers across the country were adopting her methods, and suddenly Lila Hart, former stablehand, disgraced reason for a wealthy heir's downfall, was being recognized as an authority in her field. "How does it feel?" Margaret asked, watching orders for the book pile up faster than they could fill them. "Weird, like I'm pretending to be someone more important than I actually am." "You're not pretending anything. You earned this recognition through years of actual work. That's more than most so-called experts can claim." But recognition brought its own complications. People started showing up unannounced, wanting to study with Lila directly, offering money for private instruction that she didn't have time to provide. The operation was successful, but it was also consuming every hour of every day. "We need to expand again," Cole said during a partners meeting. "The demand is there. We're turning away business because we don't have capacity." "We're barely managing what we have now," Lila countered. "Another expansion means more staff, more overhead, more complexity. At some point, we stop being trainers and just become administrators managing other people's work." That's called scaling. It's how businesses grow beyond the founder's personal limitations. Maybe I don't want to grow beyond my personal limitations. Maybe I want to stay hands-on instead of becoming some figurehead who doesn't actually work with horses anymore. The tension in the room was thick. Cole represented the business perspective. Maximize growth, capitalize on success, build something massive. Lila represented the craftsperson perspective. Maintain quality, stay true to the work, don't sacrifice excellence for scale. "We need to vote," Garrett said finally. "That's what partnerships are for." "Ethan, where do you stand?" Ethan looked between Cole and Lila, between the future of aggressive expansion and the preservation of what they'd originally built. Both were valid, both had merit, and whatever he said would tip the balance. "I think we need to define what success means to us," Ethan said carefully. "Is it revenue and scale, or is it quality and reputation? Because we can't maximize both. At some point, we have to choose what we're optimizing for." That's not an answer, Cole said. Yes, it is. I'm saying the decision isn't about expanding or not expanding. It's about what we want this place to be. A factory that churns out trained horses, or a specialized operation that does elite work for people who value excellence over volume? Those aren't mutually exclusive. In practice, they are. I've seen it. My father tried to scale his operation while maintaining personal control over everything. It nearly killed him, and it compromised the work. Ethan looked at Lila. I vote we stay focused on quality. Turn away volume work if we have to, but keep this place somewhere that Lila can still actually train instead of just managing. Cole wasn't happy, but he accepted the decision. They formalized their position. No more expansion without unanimous partner agreement. Focus on elite clients willing to pay premium prices for premium work. Maintain the specialized reputation rather than chasing volume. It meant leaving money on the table. But it also meant staying true to why they'd built this place to begin with. Thank you, Lila said that night after Eleanor was asleep. For what? For siding with me. I know Cole's frustrated. I know we could make more money if we expanded. Money isn't the point anymore. If it was, I'd have married Catherine Beaumont and inherited my father's ranch. Ethan pulled her close. The point is building something we actually believe in. And I believe in you being able to do the work you love, not becoming some corporate figurehead. When did you get wise? I'm not wise, and I'm just tired of chasing other people's definitions of success. The decision to stay focused rather than expand created space for something unexpected, actual balance. For the first time since starting the business, Ethan and Lila could spend time with their daughter without constant crisis management. They could take Sundays off. They could breathe. Eleanor grew up surrounded by horses, learning to ride almost before she could walk properly. She had her mother's intuition with animals and her father's analytical mind, a combination that suggested she might be formidable in her own right someday. She's going to be better than both of us, Lila observed one afternoon, watching 5-year-old Eleanor confidently handle a pony that most kids would have been terrified of. That's the idea, isn't it? Each generation doing better than the last. Your father didn't think that way. He wanted you to maintain what he built, not surpass it. My father was afraid of being forgotten. He built an empire and then spent his whole life defending it against threats real and imagined. Ethan watched his daughter laugh as the pony nuzzled her hand. I don't want that for her. I want her to know she can build whatever matters to her and will support it even if it's completely different from this. That's good parenting? Your father would hate it. Yeah, he probably would. The letter arrived in the spring of Eleanor's 6th year, forwarded from Wyoming through Eleanor Sr., who'd stayed in touch with people back on the Callaway Ranch. It was from David, Marcus's nephew, who'd inherited the empire. The ranch was struggling. The railroad had shifted routes, eliminating the strategic advantage that had made the land so valuable. Cattle prices had crashed. And David, competent but uninspired, hadn't been able to adapt to changing circumstances the way Marcus might have. He's considering selling, Eleanor Sr. wrote in her accompanying note. The land your grandfather built everything on, divided up and sold to whoever will pay. I thought you should know, even if there's nothing you can do about it. Ethan read the letter twice, trying to untangle his feelings about it. The ranch had been everything to Marcus, his life's work, his legacy, his proof of worth. And now it was failing, potentially disappearing entirely. You're thinking about trying to save it, Lila said, reading his expression. That's crazy, right? I walked away from that place. My father disowned me. I shouldn't care what happens to it. But you do care. I don't know, maybe it's complicated. Most important things are. Ethan spent the next week wrestling with the question. Did he owe anything to his father's legacy? Did the ranch represent something worth preserving, or just Marcus's outdated vision of empire building through domination? Finally, he wrote back to David, not offering to save the ranch, but asking questions about the specific problems it faced, the strategic challenges, the financial pressures, the market changes that had undermined its position. David's response was surprisingly detailed, almost desperate. The problems were solvable, but they required creative thinking and willingness to adapt. Exactly the kind of flexibility Marcus had never allowed. You're going to help him, Lila said when Ethan showed her David's letter. I'm thinking about it. Why? That place treated you terribly. Your father chose the ranch over you. Why should you help save it? Because maybe it's not about the ranch. Maybe it's about proving that there's a different way to do things, that you can preserve something valuable without Marcus's scorched earth approach. That's very mature. I was hoping you'd say something petty, like wanting to show your father's ghost that you were right. That too, Ethan admitted. Little bit of that too. He traveled to Wyoming in June, leaving Lila to manage the operation. The ranch looked the same, but felt different, smaller somehow, less imposing. Or maybe Ethan had just grown beyond being intimidated by it. David met him with barely concealed surprise. I didn't think you'd actually come. I wasn't sure I would either. Show me the problems. They spent 3 days reviewing every aspect of the operation. The railroad issue was significant, but not fatal. There were other distribution options if David was willing to be flexible. The cattle market crash was industry-wide, but there were opportunities in diversification that Marcus would have rejected as beneath him. Your father built this place to be a cattle empire, Ethan explained, but empires are inflexible. They dominate one thing and fall apart when circumstances change. What you need is resilience, multiple revenue streams, adaptable strategies, willingness to change direction when the market shifts. That's not the Callaway way. The Callaway way is dying. Time to try something new. Ethan outlined a restructuring plan. Reduce the cattle operation, introduce horse breeding and training using techniques from his own facility, develop the land's timber resources, create hunting leases for wealthy sportsmen. No single revenue stream would match the glory days of Marcus's cattle empire, but collectively they'd be more stable and sustainable. This would work, David said slowly, reviewing the plan. It would actually work, but I don't have the capital to implement it. I might know someone who does. Ethan thought of Harrison Cole, always looking for investment opportunities. If I can arrange financing, would you be willing to restructure this aggressively? At this point, I'll try anything that keeps the ranch from being sold off in pieces. The partnership that emerged was unexpected. Ethan and Cole investing in the Callaway Ranch, David maintaining operational control, but implementing strategies that Marcus would have rejected as too creative or undignified. It wasn't about Ethan reclaiming his inheritance. It was about saving something valuable by completely transforming how it operated. Your father would hate this, Cole observed during one of his visits to assess the restructuring progress. My father hated most things that worked, Ethan replied. He built something impressive, but he built it in a way that couldn't survive him. We're fixing that. The transformation took 3 years. 3 years of constant travel between Blackwood Ridge and Wyoming, managing 2 operations simultaneously, proving that the principles that had saved their own business could work at larger scale. The Callaway Ranch didn't return to its former glory. That version was gone forever. But it survived, evolved, became something more resilient even if it was less imposing. Eleanor, the younger one, was 9 by the time the ranch stabilized, old enough to understand that her father had saved his father's legacy even though his father had rejected him. Why did you help? She asked one evening. Grandfather was mean to you. He kicked you out. He did. And I was angry about that for a long time. But you helped anyway. Yeah, because saving something valuable isn't about whether people deserve it. Sometimes you do things because they're right, not because you'll get credit or appreciation. Eleanor thought about that. Is that why you and Mom built this place? Because it was right? We built this place because we wanted to prove something, to ourselves mostly. That we could create something real, something that mattered, without inheriting it or having it handed to us. Did you prove it? Ethan looked around the stable complex, at the operation they'd built from absolutely nothing, at the life they'd created through sheer, stubborn determination. Yeah, he said, I think we did. By the time Eleanor was 12, she was working in the stables after school with a competence that would have impressed trainers twice her age. She had none of her grandfather Marcus's need to dominate, none of his fear-based approach to control. She'd learned from watching her parents that strength came from partnership, that real power came from understanding rather than force. She's going to be something special, Garrett observed one afternoon, watching Eleanor work with a difficult mare that most adults would have struggled with. She already is, Lila said. She's proof that you can break cycles, that children don't have to inherit their parents' worst traits. You worried she'll reject this place the way Ethan rejected the ranch? Sometimes. But then I remember we're not Marcus. We're not trying to force her into a predetermined role. If she wants to do something completely different, we'll support that. And if she wants to take over here, then we'll teach her everything we know and trust her to make it better. It was this fundamental difference between Marcus's need to control his legacy and Ethan and Lila's willingness to let their daughter choose her own path that defined everything about how they built their life. The business continued successfully, though success looked different than it once had. They weren't the largest operation, weren't chasing explosive growth or maximum scale, but they were respected, sought after, known for doing elite work that others couldn't match. And that was enough. Ethan was 43 when he received word that his mother was ill. Eleanor Sr. had been living in Boston for 15 years, finally finding peace away from Wyoming and the memories it carried. But cancer didn't care about peace or new beginnings. He traveled east with his family, Lila and young Eleanor both insisting on coming. His mother looked frail in her hospital bed, nothing like the woman who'd endured 30 years of strategic marriage to Marcus Calloway. "I'm glad you came," Eleanor Sr. said, her voice weak but clear. "I wanted to see you all together, the family you built." "We're here as long as you need us," Ethan said. "I won't need long. Doctor gives me weeks, maybe." She looked at her granddaughter, 12 years old and trying to be brave. "You look like your grandmother did at your age." "That's my mother, your great-grandmother. She was formidable. You've got that in you, too." "Mom says I'm stubborn," young Eleanor replied. "Stubborn is just strength that people don't like. Don't let anyone tell you it's a flaw." Eleanor Sr. turned back to Ethan. "I'm proud of you. I probably didn't say that enough when I was healthy. But I watched you build something real, something genuine. That takes more courage than maintaining what you inherit. You taught me that. Watching you survive Marcus, that taught me more than you know. Or, I survived. But you lived. There's a difference." She reached for his hand. "Your father loved you, in his way. He just didn't know how to show it, except through expectations and control. His father raised him the same way, and his grandfather before that. You broke that cycle. You showed that strength doesn't require hardness. I'm still learning that. We all are. That's the point. We're supposed to keep learning, keep growing. Your father stopped learning the day he decided he'd figured everything out. That's what killed him more than heart failure." Eleanor Sr. died 2 weeks later, peacefully and with her son holding her hand. They buried her in Boston next to her sister, far from Wyoming and everything it represented. "She was happy at the end," Lila said on the train ride home. "That's more than a lot of people get." "She was free," Ethan corrected. "Finally free of trying to be who Marcus needed her to be. I just wish she'd found that freedom earlier." "Some people need permission to leave. You gave her that when you left first. Showed her it was possible." Ethan hadn't thought about it that way, but Lila was probably right. His mother's escape to Boston had only happened after he'd proven that walking away from the Calloway expectations didn't mean destruction. Young Eleanor was quiet for most of the journey, processing her grandmother's death and the stories she'd heard about family history she'd only partially understood before. "Grandfather sounds like he was terrible," she said finally. "He was complicated," Ethan replied carefully. "He built something impressive, but hurt people doing it, including himself." "Do you miss him?" "Sometimes. I miss who he could have been if he'd been less afraid, but I don't miss who he actually was. That's sad." "Yeah, it is. I don't want to be like that. I don't want people to remember me as someone who could have been better." "Then don't be. You get to choose who you become. That's the whole point." They returned to Blackwood Ridge to find the business thriving under Margaret's management. The operation had become stable enough that Ethan's absence for 2 weeks barely registered, a far cry from the early days when missing a single day felt catastrophic. "This is what success actually looks like," Lila observed. "Not constant growth or explosive expansion, just sustainability, being able to step away without everything collapsing." "My father would have hated that. He'd see delegation as weakness." "Your father saw everything except total control as weakness. That's why he died angry and alone." It was harsh, but true. Marcus had built an empire and lost everyone who mattered in the process. Ethan had built something smaller, but surrounded by people who actually cared about him. The years continued rolling forward, each bringing new challenges and small victories. Eleanor grew into a teenager with her mother's gift for horses and her father's strategic thinking. She started working seriously in the operation, not because it was expected, but because she genuinely loved it. "I want to expand the training program," she said at 15. presenting her parents with a detailed proposal, specifically for young riders, teaching them not just technique, but the whole philosophy of partnership with horses instead of dominance. That's ambitious, Ethan said, reviewing her plan. That's necessary. Most training programs still teach the old domination methods. Someone needs to show there's a better way. Sounds like someone's been listening to her mother. And her father. You both taught me that changing how things are done matters more than just maintaining tradition. They implemented Eleanor's program the following spring, starting small but with immediate success. Young riders responded to the partnership-based approach in ways that validated everything Lila had been teaching for years. Within 2 years, they had a waiting list of families wanting their children trained in these methods. We're building a legacy, Garrett observed during a partners meeting, not through control or domination, but through teaching, through spreading ideas that actually make things better. That's what I wanted, Lila said, not to be remembered, but for the knowledge to survive and spread, for horses to be treated better because people learn different methods. You'll be remembered anyway. Can't help that when you change how an entire industry thinks about training. Ethan watched the program grow, watched his daughter develop into a skilled trainer in her own right, and felt something he hadn't expected: contentment. Not the satisfaction of conquering or dominating, but the quieter pleasure of building something sustainable and watching it work. He was 50 when Harrison Cole approached him with an offer. "I want to buy out my stake," Cole said. "Not because the business is failing, it's more successful than I projected. But I'm getting old, simplifying my holdings. And I think this place works better as a family operation anyway." "We can't afford to buy you out at full value," Ethan said honestly. "I know, I'm giving you a steep discount. Call it recognition that I made money on this investment beyond what I expected. You've earned the right to full ownership." The transaction was completed by autumn. For the first time since they'd started, the business belonged entirely to Ethan, Lila, and Garrett. No outside partners, no investors with competing interests. Just the people who'd built it, and the legacy they were creating. "We did it," Lila said when the paperwork was finalized. "Full ownership of something we built from nothing. How does it feel?" "It feels like we already owned it. Cole's stake was just paperwork." Ethan pulled her close. "The real ownership has always been in the work, in showing up every day and choosing this life. That's poetic for someone who claims not to be romantic. I've learned a few things over the years." Eleanor graduated from the youth program she'd helped create and started working full-time in the operation at 18. She brought fresh ideas and energy, pushing them to evolve in ways that felt right, even when they were uncomfortable. "We should develop our own breeding lines," she proposed. "Not just training other people's horses, but creating our own stock with temperament suited for partnership-based training." "That's a massive undertaking," Garrett cautioned. "Breeding programs take years to develop, decades to establish quality lines." "Good thing I'm young then. I've got decades." They started small, acquiring carefully selected breeding stock, documenting bloodlines, beginning the long process of developing horses that embodied the principles they taught. It was Eleanor's project primarily, but it gave the operation a new dimension and a new future. Ethan was 55 when he finally returned to the Callaway Ranch with Lila and Eleanor, invited by David to see how the restructuring had succeeded. The ranch looked completely different from his childhood. The massive cattle operation had been reduced to sustainable levels. Horse breeding and training facilities, modeled on their own operation, occupied what had been empty pasture. Timber operations, hunting leases, and diversified agriculture had replaced single-minded focus on cattle dominance. "Your father would have hated this," David said, showing them around. "But it works. Better than the old way ever did. More stable, more sustainable, more humane to the animals and the people working here." "He would have hated it," Ethan agreed, "but that's because he confused size with success. He wanted an empire. This is better. It's a working ranch that serves its purpose without crushing everyone involved. I'm glad you pushed me to try this approach. Saved the ranch and probably my sanity." They walked through facilities that looked nothing like the empire Marcus had built, but were more viable for exactly that reason. Young Eleanor absorbed everything, comparing their methods to what she'd grown up with, already thinking about how to integrate ideas across operations. "This was grandfather's place?" she asked. "Yeah, very different then, bigger, harsher, more focused on dominance than sustainability." "I'm glad you changed it." "Changed him, I mean. His legacy." "I didn't change him. He died angry and unforgiving, but I changed what his work became. That's different. They stayed for 3 days, and on the last evening, Ethan stood on the ridge where his father had delivered the ultimatum that changed everything: marry into power or lose everything. "You thinking about what might have been?" Lila asked, joining him on the ridge. "Thinking about what is? How differently everything turned out from what Marcus planned. Better or worse? Just different. If I'd married Catherine Beaumont, this ranch would probably still be unchanged. Massive cattle operation. Unchanged methods, unchanged everything. It would have survived by not evolving." "Would you have been happy?" "No. I'd have been what Marcus wanted: competent, effective, miserable, trading authenticity for approval." Ethan turned to face her. "I chose you instead, and yeah, it was hard. Brutal sometimes, but it was real. Everything we built was ours, earned through actual work instead of inheritance. You ever regret it, even for a moment?" "Never. Not even in the worst times. Because the worst times with you were still better than the best times would have been living someone else's life." Lila kissed him, and in that moment, standing on the ridge where his old life had ended and his real life had begun, Ethan felt complete. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. Not because they'd won some ultimate victory. Success wasn't that simple. But because they'd built something true, something that mattered, something that would continue beyond them through their daughter and the people they'd taught. The years that followed brought the inevitable challenges of aging: slower recovery from physical work, reading glasses, joints that complained about weather changes. Ethan and Lila gradually shifted from active training to supervision and teaching, passing more responsibility to Eleanor and the staff they'd trained. "I don't like getting old," Lila complained one morning after her back seized up from sleeping wrong. "Better than the alternative." "Is it? I used to be able to work 12-hour days without feeling it. Now I'm wiped after 6. So work 6 hours. We've built enough that you don't have to kill yourself anymore." Ethan rubbed her shoulders, working out the tension. "That was the whole point, remember? Building something sustainable so we could actually live instead of just surviving." "When did you become the wise one?" "I've always been wise. You just never listened." She elbowed him, but gently. They'd learned over decades together how to fight without causing real damage, how to disagree without threatening the foundation. Eleanor took over as primary operations manager at 25, bringing her generation's perspective to an operation built by their parents' hands. She kept the core principles: partnership over dominance, quality over quantity, sustainable growth over explosive expansion, but adapted them to new circumstances and opportunities. "You're not doing it the way we did it," Lila observed, watching Eleanor restructure their client intake process. "Should I be?" "No, that's my point. You're making it yours, making it better. That's exactly what you should be doing." "You're not worried I'll mess up what you built?" "I'm worried you won't. If this place looks exactly the same in 20 years, it means we failed to teach you how to adapt and improve. Change is proof of success, not failure." Garrett retired at 70, selling his stake to Eleanor with the same generous terms Cole had offered years before. The old man had been there from the beginning, had believed in them when nobody else would, had taught them half of what they knew about actually running a business. "You made me wealthier than I ever expected to be," Garrett said at his retirement gathering. "But more than that, you made me proud. Watching you two build this from nothing, watching you stay true to your values even when it would have been easier not to, that mattered more than the money." "We couldn't have done it without you," Ethan said honestly. "You could have. It would have been harder and taken longer, but you'd have managed. That's what stubborn people do." Garrett raised his glass. "To the next chapter, and to knowing when to step back and let the young folks take over." Ethan was 62 when he had his health scare. Not a heart attack like his father, but serious enough to require surgery and months of recovery. It was terrifying, lying in a hospital bed confronting his own mortality, realizing how much time had passed since that day he'd walked away from the Callaway ranch. "I'm not ready to die," he told Lila during one of his darker moments. "Good, because I'm not ready to let you." She held his hand tight enough to hurt. "You're going to recover, and we're going to have years left. Stop being dramatic." "I'm scared." "I know, me too. But we've been scared before and survived. This is just one more thing." He recovered, though slower than he wanted. The experience changed something in him, though, made him more aware of time's passage, more conscious of what he wanted to do with whatever years remained. "I want to write our story," he told Lila once he was back on his feet. "Not for publication necessarily, just to have it documented. How we started, what we built, why we made the choices we made." "You think anyone will care?" "I think Eleanor might. Her children someday. People who'll want to know that you can choose love over logic and build something real from that choice." That's sentimental. That's true. And there's a difference. He spent the next 2 years writing, documenting not just the business success, but the personal journey. The fear and struggle, the doubts and setbacks, the times they'd almost failed and somehow pushed through anyway. It wasn't a triumph story. It was a survival story, which was more honest. Eleanor read it when he finished, taking several days to work through the manuscript. When she came back to discuss it, her eyes were red. "I didn't know half of this," she said. "I knew you'd started with nothing, but I didn't understand how close you came to losing everything, multiple times. We didn't want to scare you with how precarious things were." "I'm not scared. I'm amazed. You kept going even when it looked impossible. You chose each other even when everyone said you shouldn't. You built something lasting from absolutely nothing." She paused. "That's what I want to do. Not just maintain what you built, but use what you taught me to build something of my own." "That's exactly what you should do. Even if it means changing things here, taking the operation in directions you didn't plan. Especially then, the whole point of what we built was proving you can create something new instead of just maintaining the past. If you keep this place exactly as we left it, you're doing the Marcus Calloway thing, trying to freeze your legacy in time. Don't do that." Eleanor hugged him, and Ethan felt the generational transfer happening in real time. They were no longer the builders. They were now the foundation that the next generation built upon. Ethan and Lila stepped back from daily operations at 65, not retiring completely but shifting to advisory roles. They'd earned the right to slow mornings and afternoons spent watching their daughter run the operation they'd created. "Strange, isn't it?" Lila said one morning, drinking coffee on the porch while Eleanor worked in the training arena. "We spent 25 years building this place. Now it's hers. It was always supposed to become hers. That's what building a legacy actually means. Creating something that continues without you. Your father didn't understand that. He wanted his empire preserved exactly as he created it. My father was terrified of being forgotten. He confused preservation with immortality." Ethan watched Eleanor work with a difficult mare, using techniques they'd taught her, but applying them with her own style. "This is better. Letting it evolve, letting her make it hers. That's how things survive, by adapting, not by freezing." They traveled some in those years, visiting the places they'd never had time to see when they were building the business. Nothing fancy, just the two of them. A wagon or train tickets, exploring the territories they'd spent decades working in, but never really experiencing. "We should have done this earlier," Lila said during one trip to California, watching the ocean for the first time in her life. "We were too busy surviving. Was it worth it? All those years of struggle and stress?" Ethan thought about the question seriously. "Yeah, because we built something that mattered, not just to us, but to Eleanor, to the people we trained, to the horses we treated better than they would have been treated otherwise. We changed some small piece of how the world works. That's worth decades of stress." "That's a very philosophical answer." "I'm old. I'm allowed to be philosophical." She laughed, and the sound carried across the beach, mixing with the waves. They'd both aged, gray hair, weathered faces, bodies that protested more than they used to, but the core of who they were together remained unchanged. Ethan was 70 when David wrote to say the Calloway Ranch was being sold. Not because it was failing, the restructured operation was successful, but because David's children had no interest in ranching and he was ready to retire somewhere warm. "End of an era," Ethan said, reading the letter. "You going to try to buy it? Keep it in the family somehow?" "No, that's Marcus's dream, not mine. The ranch served its purpose. It survived. It evolved. It proved that transformation works. But I don't need to own it to prove that." "You're okay with it passing to strangers?" "I'm okay with it passing to people who'll use it well. That's all that matters." The ranch sold to a consortium that planned to continue the diversified operations David had established. The Calloway name would disappear from ownership, but the changes Ethan had pushed for would remain. It was a strange sort of legacy, anonymous but effective, Eleanor married at 32, choosing a man named Thomas who worked as a veterinarian and understood the demands of her life. Their wedding was held in the covered arena, just like Ethan and Lila's had been, continuing a tradition of celebrating partnerships in the space where real work happened. "You happy?" Ethan asked his daughter during the reception. "Terrified and happy. Is that normal?" "That's the only way to be. If you're not scared, you're not paying attention to what you're risking." "Did you know it would work out when you chose Mom?" "No, I hoped it would. I believed it could, but I didn't know. Nobody ever knows. You just choose the person who makes the unknown feel worth facing. That's what Thomas does for me." "Then you chose right." Eleanor had her first child at 34, a daughter they named Lila. And watching his granddaughter's birth, Ethan felt the strange circularity of life asserting itself. He'd walked away from his father's legacy and built his own, and now that legacy was continuing through his daughter into a future he'd never see. "You thinking about mortality again?" Lila asked, finding him holding baby Lila and staring into space. "Thinking about continuation, how we're all just links in a chain, passing things forward." That's very profound for someone holding a baby who just filled her diaper. Even profound moments include dirty diapers. That's life. They settled into their 70s with the satisfaction of people who'd lived fully and built something lasting, not perfectly. They'd made mistakes, had regrets, could identify dozens of things they'd do differently given another chance. But perfectly wasn't the point. Honestly was the point. And they'd lived honestly, chosen authentically, built something real from nothing but work and will and stubborn love. Ethan was 76 when Lila got sick. Not suddenly, but with the gradual decline of systems wearing out after decades of hard use. Cancer again, like his mother, but slower and less treatable. "I'm not ready," Ethan said, holding her hand in the hospital room that felt like déjà vu. "Nobody's ever ready. That's not how it works. We were supposed to have more time. We had 50 years. That's more than most people get." Lila's voice was weak but clear. "And we used it well. Built something that matters, raised a daughter who's even better than we are, loved each other through everything. That's a full life, Ethan." "It's not enough. It never is. That's the nature of loving someone. There's never enough time." She squeezed his hand. "But I'm grateful for what we had. Every hard year, every struggle, every moment of doubt. I'd do it all again exactly the same way. Even the times we almost lost everything? Especially those times, because we didn't lose everything. We kept going, kept choosing each other, kept building. That's what I'm proud of." Lila died on a Tuesday morning with spring sun streaming through the hospital window. Ethan was holding her hand, had been holding it for hours, and he felt the moment she left. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift from presence to absence. Eleanor found him still sitting there hours later, unable to let go. "Dad," she said gently, "she's gone." "I know," but he didn't release her hand. I need a minute." "Take as long as you need." They buried Lila on a hill overlooking the operation she'd built, the stables and arenas, and the land she'd transformed from employment into purpose. The funeral was huge. Former clients, apprentices she'd trained, people whose lives she'd touched through her work or her teaching, or simply by existing as proof that you could succeed on your own terms. "She changed everything," one of the older apprentices said during the service. "Not just how we train horses, but how we think about partnership and respect and building something that lasts." Ethan stood listening to people describe his wife, their wife really, since she'd belonged to this community as much as to him, and realized that she'd achieved what Marcus had died trying to accomplish. Not through dominance or empire building, but through generosity and teaching and genuinely caring about making things better. She'd built a legacy that wasn't about her. And that was exactly what had made it permanent. The months after Lila's death were the hardest of Ethan's life. Harder than being disowned, harder than the years of poverty and struggle, harder than any business crisis they'd faced. Because for the first time in 50 years, he was alone in a way that felt fundamental. "You should move in with us," Eleanor offered. "The house has plenty of room." "I appreciate that, but I need to stay here, in the space we built together. Being somewhere else would feel like abandoning her." "She's gone, Dad. She's not in the building." "I know, but the life we built is, and I'm not ready to leave that yet." He stayed in the small house they'd upgraded over the years, surrounded by 50 years of accumulated life. Photos, books, the manuscript he'd written about their journey, evidence that they'd existed, that their choices had mattered, that love had been enough even when logic said it shouldn't be. Young Lila, his granddaughter, spent afternoons with him, learning to ride under his supervision the way Eleanor had learned under her parents. "Tell me about Grandma," she'd ask regularly, and Ethan would tell her, not sanitized stories, but real ones. About the woman who'd worked in his father's stables and refused to be intimidated by wealth or power. About the partnership they'd built that had defied every expectation. About the years of struggle and the moments of triumph and everything in between. "She sounds amazing," young Lila said. She was, but she was also stubborn and difficult and sometimes wrong about things. That's what made her real instead of just a story. You miss her. "Every single day, but I'm also grateful I had her for as long as I did. That's better than never having her at all." Ethan was 81 when Eleanor approached him with a proposal. "We want to rename the operation," she said. "Heart Training Stables, after Mom. She built this place as much as you did. More, really, since she did the actual work that made us famous. She'd hate that. She never wanted recognition." "I know. That's why we should do it anyway. She spent her whole life making other people better. Horses, trainers, apprentices. Someone should make sure she's remembered." Ethan thought about Lila's lifelong insistence on the work mattering more than the credit. But Eleanor was right. Sometimes people who don't seek recognition deserve it most. "Do it," he said. She'd be annoyed, but secretly pleased. The dedication ceremony was held on what would have been Lila's 80th birthday. A simple brass plaque at the stable entrance. Heart Training Stables, founded by Lila Hart, who taught us that partnership beats dominance and patience builds more than force ever could. Standing before it, Ethan felt tears he didn't try to hide. His wife had started as a nameless stable girl with no family, no wealth, no prospects beyond daily labor. And she'd ended as the namesake of an operation known across the country, a teacher whose methods had changed an industry, a woman whose legacy would continue long after anyone who'd known her personally was gone. She'd won. Not by Marcus's definition of winning. She'd never built an empire or dominated anything. But by the measure that actually mattered, she'd succeeded completely. She'd made things better. And she'd done it by being exactly who she was, without compromise or apology. Ethan lived to 87, long enough to see young Lila start training seriously, long enough to know that the work would continue through another generation. His body was failing in the ways bodies do. Systems shutting down, energy fading, the machinery simply wearing out after decades of use. Eleanor sat with him on his last coherent day, holding his hand the way he'd held Lila's. "You built something good," she said. "You and Mom. Something that's going to last. We just made choices. The rest happened because of those choices. You chose love over logic, partnership over power, building something real over inheriting something hollow. Those weren't small choices. They felt obvious at the time. That's because you're both who you were, but they weren't obvious to most people. Most people would have chosen differently." Ethan looked out the window at the operation spread before him. Stables and arenas, and land transformed by work and vision and stubborn refusal to accept limitations. This was their answer to Marcus's empire. Smaller, perhaps, but more human, more honest, more true. Tell Lila, the young one, tell her she can be whoever she wants. She doesn't have to maintain what we built if something else calls to her. I'll tell her, but I think she'll choose this. She loves it the way Mom did. Then she'll do it better than we did. That's the point. He died that night, quietly and without drama, simply stopping after 87 years of living harder and more fully than most people managed in longer lifetimes. They buried him next to Lila on the hill overlooking Heart Training Stables, two people who'd chosen each other against every rational argument and built something lasting from that choice. The headstone was simple. Ethan Calloway Hart. He proved love was enough. Years later, young Lila would stand on that hill with her own daughter, pointing out the graves of the great-grandparents she'd barely known, but whose legacy she lived inside every day. They started with nothing, she'd explain, walked away from everything because they believed in each other more than they believed in security. And they built all this. Was it hard? Incredibly hard. They almost failed 100 times, But they kept going because they'd chosen each other, and that choice meant something. That's romantic. That's real. Romance is easy when everything's perfect. What they had was better. They chose each other when everything was falling apart, and that choice held. The operation continued, evolving through the generations, each adding their own perspective while maintaining the core principles Ethan and Lila had established. The Heart name became synonymous with ethical horse training, with partnership over dominance, with building something sustainable instead of something exploitative. And sometimes, when the wind moved through the stables in a particular way, workers swore they could hear it, the sound of a woman's quiet voice, murmuring encouragement to a nervous horse, teaching patience and partnership with every word. Lila's ghost, perhaps, or just the echo of principles so deeply embedded in the place that they'd become part of its structure. But whether ghost or echo or simply memory, the message remained constant. You don't need an empire to matter. You don't need dominance to succeed. You just need honest work, genuine partnership, and the courage to build something real even when the world tells you it's impossible. That was the legacy. Not money or land or status, but the simple revolutionary idea that love could be foundation enough to build a life on, if you were brave enough to try. And in the end, on that hill overlooking stables that bore her name, that truth stood unshakable. Some choices don't just change lives. They change what's possible for everyone who comes after. And the choice Ethan Calloway made that day in his father's office, turning away from an empire to reach for the hand of a woman with dirt under her fingernails, had echoed forward through time until it became not just one man's story, but proof that there's more than one way to win, more than one definition of success, more than one path to building something that lasts. He'd walked away from an inheritance and found something better, a life earned rather than given, a partnership built rather than arranged, a legacy measured not in acres, but in lives changed and principles passed forward. That was the victory. Not triumphant or perfect or even particularly dramatic, just honest and earned and true. And on the frontier where survival demanded everything you had, where building required more than money could buy, where love was tested daily against the grinding reality of making a life work, that truth was enough. It was always enough.